Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I am calling a Superhero Pantheon redux. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can follow me on Twitter at Jerome C. 1985. And the reason that this is a redux is because of circumstances. A lot of this is on me. I've been doing a lot of write ups for my list, my 100 favorite movies ever. So that has been taking up a lot of my time over the last few weeks, and as you know, it's been a very mentally stressful period of time with the election last week, as well as the as COVID-19 continuing to play a factor in all of our lives. Plus, I have a real job. This does not pay the bills. I can send you my PayPal link if you want to pay me to do this. But until then, unfortunately, I am at the mercy of my own schedule. So, unfortunately, we do not have a brand new episode of Pantheon to do this week. But what I have decided to do instead is compensate by putting up a couple of episodes that we did about 2 years ago. These have never been posted onto the real world feed, so technically it could be new to you if you have not listened to these episodes. These are the second and third episodes that we ever did, where we reviewed 1978's Superman the movie and 1989's Batman with Michael Keaton. And what I wanted to do is to just kind of record a brief introduction and talk to Brian for a few minutes. Brian, you can follow him at Brian to Brain. And Brian, to celebrate this redux, apparently you decided to get a haircut.
Yeah, it was 18 months. It felt like it was time. I had the whole Bandito, El Mariachi look going on. Also, a friend of mine also said I went from Daniel Bryan to Bryan Danielson. So there you go. Or vice versa. Whatever the path he went on, and then cut his hair and went super ultra liberal vegan for a period of time on TV. But yeah, I'm not doing that. But I definitely cut my hair. It feels good. A lot of changes. Um, I don't know. Things happen. You decide to cut your hair. That's all I can say. I guess it was because showers take forever when you have long hair, and then you're only washing it twice a week to maintain that oily kind of flow that keeps it from not curling up like my hair does. So, is what it is. That's hair maintenance. But on other things like the election's going on, the world's changing. I got on a deep dive on SCTV, which is the counterpart to SNL from the early '70s. If you want to go on a deep dive on that with John Candy, Catherine O'Hara, Eugene Levy, all those great talented people, Joe Flattery, Dave Thomas, Rick Moranis. That's kind of what I've been doing. Like, I've been watching all these random episodes of SCTV on YouTube uploaded from people's recorded 90s VHSs. So that's what I've been doing. Also been watching some movies on Hulu and, Netflix, and catching up on DuckTales. So I've been kind of catching up on my shows, and Mandalorian has been kind of freaking me out. And, with Boba Fett coming back. Spoiler alert! If that is Boba Fett. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I've been kind of catching up on things and planning things out for next year. We're definitely doing the Studio Ghibli something. I don't know if it's going to be a monthly thing or we're going to do it once a month. I don't know. We're gonna do all the movies probably. There's, I think, 13 of them, whatever it is. We're gonna do that, and then plus, I got some little goodies on the side that I'm planning for some reviews. So, this podcast is gonna be going next year for sure. 2021, we're gonna have a lot of fresh content, but this time we're looking back on Superman and Batman '89. Batman '89 seems more relevant now. I wouldn't change the legacy score because it seems about the same, and you'll hear about it when we talked about it 2 years ago. But with the whole Michael Keaton thing coming back, and the whole Crisis on Infinite Earth special on CW, tying in the Batman '89 universe, so all these things kind of happening in the last year or so, and all these exciting things coming to the DC universe, and it's going to be interesting. I hope the Flash movie actually does happen. Knock on wood. But yeah, because with the whole filming thing. But hey, if they're filming Spider-Man 3 as we speak right now, then they're probably going to make that Flash movie then, and we're going to get Michael Keaton in some kind of weird alternate universe or multiverse. And yeah, if we get a scene with Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton, I think I'm going to die.
I think that would be it would be fascinating. Will be fascinating to see what that looks like. What Michael Keaton in the year 2021 or 2022, how that is all going to factor in. But I do want to say that I've been spending a lot of time watching the movies that are part of my list. Make sure that you go to entertherealworld.com to read what I have been writing about the different movies, and I'm going to be coming to the end, and there's a lot of movies and a lot of great movies that just have recently completed The Godfather. You will see that review posted, if not by the time you are listening to this, then very shortly, as well as Parasite and Goodfellas and all that jazz. So please make sure that you're going to entertherealworld.com to look at what I've been writing about. Kevin Ford and I, we have been watching Better Call Saul. As of this recording, as Brian and I are recording right now, we have one season left to record about, and that is season 5. We have already banked our season 4 episode. Our season 3 episode came out on election day, so maybe we should have rethought that. But there is a great visual connection, Brian. I'm not sure. Kevin Ford texted me this. There is a shot in Better Call Saul season 3. This is not spoilery, but there is a scene where Michael McKean is in a courtroom, and the exit sign can be seen in the forefront with Michael McKean sitting in a chair in the background. And Kevin texted me this photo that a photojournalist took of Trump at his press conference, and the exit sign almost positioned in the exact same way as what we saw in Better Call Saul season 3. So clearly somebody who is a photographer in the White House is also a Better Call Saul fan.
It's one of those weird things. I've never seen this image, but the way you describe it, I'm not surprised. And the way you use that symbolism, hopefully I'm still knocking on wood on this one, but hopefully we can play the last 10 minutes of Return of the Jedi on loop for all the month of December. That's all I'm going to say. Da 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 da.
Well, we need to bring back the original music because I hate the remake version of that song that they use at the end. I really want to bring back the old version desperately.
Hopefully Disney Plus will upload those originals. Probably not, but hey, you never know. Disney Plus is desperate for content, so you probably get some.
Okay, it's one of those things where I almost wonder if there's like a handshake agreement where they cannot release the originals until George Lucas has passed on. That's my running theory at this point.
If that's in writing, then unfortunately it's probably true. But you never know. You probably can convince the guy at a later age. He's in the 70s right now. Maybe he'll get a little less cranky about it in his 80s. I don't know. But I wanted to mention one more thing. I talked about the Batman review. Superman 78, still an incredible movie. This might be my only chance to say this, but Brandon Routh, I shat on him in my review in 2019 for Superman Returns, and I think him coming back in the CW crossover totally redeemed himself. And if they want to do a Kingdom Come or some separate show on HBO Max or even CW, I'm all for it. And I feel like Brandon Routh totally redeemed himself, and him as an older Superman, totally into it. When he was doing it in 2006 with some questionable people around him, not going to mention their names, maybe it wasn't the right time, but I think, he kind of redeemed himself. So I wanted to say that, put that out there, because I feel like I really shat on him in that review last year, a year and a half ago, whatever it was. But I think he redeemed himself, and this is kind of the appropriate time to put it, since you're about to listen to the review of the Christopher Reeves film.
Absolutely, and I will just say that I still really liked Brandon Routh in the Superman Returns. He's really good in the series, and he's just really good on Legends of Tomorrow. So if you are looking for a fun binge, definitely consider that. It's not something that we are ever going to probably discuss, because I don't believe that it is necessarily worthy of the Pantheon, but it is certainly a fun show. Without any further ado, though, I would like to kick it to our reviews of first Superman 1978. You will hear the trailer, and then you will hear our discussion. I apologize for the audio. It sounds like I'm in an echo chamber. I have headphones now, so the audio will never be that much of a problem. But just please keep that in mind, that the audio quality is not going to be great on either of our first 2 episodes. But thankfully, we have a slightly better idea of what we're doing. So enjoy that. Next week, you are going to get another Redux, as we are going to be posting episodes 3 and 4, where we discuss the 2000 X-Men and the 2008 Iron Man. But for right now, go ahead and enjoy the review of 2 old school superhero movies, Superman 1978 and Batman 1989.
Because of the wisdom and compassion of Jor-El, because he knew the human race had the capacity for goodness, he sent us his only son. His name is Kal-El. He will call himself Clark Kent. But the world will know him as Superman. This year, Superman brings you the gift of flight. Superman, the movie.
We're here to talk about the first Superman. Why did we have to put the fact that it was a movie in that title?
My theory, and I might be wrong, I don't know, it's because they had the serials back in the day, right? So every time you would go into a theater, they would have like Superman or Batman serials. So this was the first time they can call it the movie because it wasn't a movie yet.
Now, when we say cereal, we're not talking about breakfast cereal. We're not even talking about the hit podcast. We're talking about basically these 12 to 15-minute shorts that would play before your longer 2-hour movies. And there were a number of them, including Batman and Robin. I believe there was a Superman one as well. And that's kind of the history of superhero movies before 1978, as you had a lot of these serials. You did have a Superman television show, which aired in the 50s, and of course you also had the Adam West version of Batman, probably the most famous superhero show even to this day, where you had Adam West playing Batman. That also spawned a movie of its own in 1967. Basically, when it came to superhero movies before Superman, they were not taken very seriously.
Nope, not at all. And I guess you can attribute that to the 60s Batman, kind of with the way that the tongue-in-cheekness with it. But at the same time, it made it popular, and it's not necessarily was like looked down on. But it's just not the attitude and approach that they had for superhero stuff at the time, you know? And I think when they started, because, you sent me that link to the documentary. I watched some of that documentary. At the time, like, they didn't know what kind of tone they wanted. It kind of came off cheesy at first, but then they had to bring in other writers to, like, make it not so cheesy and make it more, like a actual like blockbuster movie, at the time.
And in the 1970s, the history of film in general, if you know anything about cinema in the 1970s, you had a lot of gritty, realistic films. I mean, the film industry, when you look at the film industry in 2017 and compare it to your 1973, 74, 75, it's a completely different universe. If you go back and watch a movie like Dog Day Afternoon, for example, which is a very good movie that was made in 1975, starring Al Pacino, it's completely different. It's so much slower, and I think a lot of people would watch a movie like that and get very bored very quickly. But the history of the film industry in the 1970s was just so completely different that to even try to make a superhero movie at that time would have been extremely difficult, because I think the perception at that time was that superhero movies are basically only for kids, and that if you put anything on the screen for them, that it really doesn't matter, that they're just, you can make it as cheesy as you want, you can have it be as goofy and as stupid as you want, and it doesn't matter because it's just the superhero genre. And obviously in 2017, things have changed so much to where the film industry relies on superhero movies to be the big breadwinners.
Yeah, it's a totally different time. And, in the 70s, like, you can make these, like, dramas that, very, like you said, gritty, realistic. And, like, Dog Day Afternoon, that was probably one of the bigger studio titles released by that studio. I don't remember what studio. I think it was Warner Brothers, actually.
I think it was Warner Brothers. And, I think if you want to get into an even more famous example, a movie like The Godfather, which was made in 1972. I mean, that was one of the biggest box office hits of its day. And if The Godfather came out now, I can't imagine that it would be that big of a box office hit, just because the dynamics of this industry have changed so much. And, back in 1972, The Godfather was a huge property. It was originally a book. It became a movie, and it kind of spawned its own franchise. Books, movies, video games. So the guy, even a movie like The Godfather, which is very much a product of 70s cinema, kind of was a franchise unto itself.
Yeah, and I think once you hit Jaws, that's when the blockbuster kind of hit the forefront, And then right after that, Star Wars, and then all of a sudden, like, the budget has to be bigger, it's got to be more action-packed, more visuals and visual effects, and that's where all this kind of ties in together with Superman. Because right after all that, Jaws and Star Wars, we get Superman, and like it's a culmination of all that because we get John Williams as the score, which I thought was just like total. It's such a move that they would do. It's a safe move because he just was hot off of Star Wars and Jaws, like I just said, and to make it sound like one of those movies, like it's subconsciously like, yeah, this is like a big time movie like those other movies.
Absolutely. And there's so much to discuss with something like this, but the fact of the matter is, I mentioned The Godfather, it has two very important connections to that film. The first of being that Mario Puzo, who wrote the original Godfather book, had a hand in establishing the story for this particular film. And the other connection, of course, is that Marlon Brando got paid $3.5 million for about 15 minutes of screen time in number one, and he did some work for number two, which may or may not be seen depending on which version of the film. To get paid $3.5 million, Brian, for 15 minutes of screen time, that's a pretty good gig, especially in 1978 money.
Yeah, I think his family got residuals when they reused him in 2006.
Of course they did.
Yeah. So, man, like, shoot, he got a good gig. Coming off The Godfather, he probably could have done anything, I guess. And what was the other one? I know there's that controversial...
Last Tango in Paris.
Yes, Last Tango in Paris. Yeah, and I remember... Because I've seen some old, like, True Hollywood Story type stuff on Marlon Brando back in the day because when I first saw Godfather, I got on this thing where like, I wonder what Marlon Brando was like all about back in the day. And you see like his structure and man, he was really into his roles, man. And it seemed like this one, because when I watched that documentary earlier this morning before we recorded, like he just seems like he's just doing it for like the money, maybe. I don't know. He just seemed like out of it. But those are the stories I've heard about Marlon Brando as well, that he's just like a crazy dude that kind of does his own thing.
Yes.
I read the story about the Oscars where instead of accepting his Oscar, he sent like an Indian woman to accept his Oscar.
Marlon Brando has a reputation in Hollywood to the point that if you look at his filmography, he really hasn't done a lot, and he's still considered to be one of the most iconic performers that has ever been on screen. And he's still got a number of incredible performances. I mean, looking at The Godfather and looking at so much else of what he's done, I think it would be really difficult to make people understand in the year 2017 just how important getting someone like Marlon Brando into a Superman film was, because what it does is it adds a lot of credibility, and that's what you need, especially when the superhero genre does not have credibility. Adam West and Burt Ward, those are the kinds of people that are in superhero movies, not Marlon Brando or Gene Hackman or Jack Nicholson, who we're going to talk about next week when we talk about Batman 1989. So I think one of the most important legacies of this particular film is to think about that credibility. You have the writer of The Godfather, you have Marlon Brando, and you have Gene Hackman, who was selected to play Lex Luthor.
It makes sense because now it gives you the leeway to cast a nobody, like Christopher Reeves was at the time as Superman. So, budget-wise, it makes sense. You have the star power that you needed, so it made, it gives you, like, that's why there's, like, this tradition of casting a nobody as, Superman. Because, it's the legacy of you build a cast around him and then you hire a nobody. And that's kind of what we get now. When we got in 06 with Brandon Routh and then Henry Cavill in 2014. So, it's kind of this formula that's been established with this. And you kind of see it in other movies, too. Like, for instance, Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire was not... I mean, he was a name, but he wasn't that big, right? And he wasn't, like, a star. But then you put him up with, like, you put... who else was in that movie? Willem Dafoe? Oh, actually, no, there was no stars in that movie.
In the first Spider-Man, it was Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst.
Oh, yeah, Kirsten Dunst was kind of big after, Bring It On?
Because she was in Bring It On, Jumanji. She was a child. I mean, she's a child.
Yeah, so she was a name. Sam Raimi had a name to him. Sony put a lot of money behind it, but, Tobey Maguire was like a nobody. So
Willem Dafoe was in the original. James Franco really wasn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't a big star at that point. He was just coming off of Freaks and Geeks, but he wasn't really a big star either. So arguably the only real big star that was in the original Spider-Man was Willem Dafoe, and I'm not sure if you could consider him a big star.
Yeah, but you can kind of see what I'm saying is like this idea that they cast established a no one actor, but they're still a good actor. It's just they're going to make a name for themselves. So, and obviously Marlon Brando probably made a lot more money on Superman 1 than Christopher Reeves did. I don't know, but it's kind of like the Jack Nicholson thing too. Like, he made so much more money than Michael Keaton, which we'll talk about next week, which I think is a big thing. So,
oh man, well, I can't wait to talk about that. But Jack Nicholson, amazing. So, I mean, I want to talk about The Godfather, pun very much intended here, of superhero movies, and that's the director. We have to talk about the director, Richard Donner, because if you're going to take this franchise seriously, then you have to have somebody who's going to take it seriously as a director, and that's what Richard Donner did. And he directed essentially all of the first film and directed a lot of the second film, since one of the unusual aspects of production was that there were two films being created at once, and the idea was that they were going to, basically make the first two Superman films. And unlike the way that movies are made today, where the studios exhibit a lot of heavy control and you basically have these very important producers, like your Kevin Feige's for the Marvel franchise, and your Jeff Johns in DC, and your Kathleen Kennedy's for Star Wars. It's funny to listen to the production history of this movie, because you had some producers who basically bought the rights to make this movie on their own, and the only thing that Warner Brothers did essentially was to distribute it, and I guess they eventually did do some funding of it, but this is just a very different way for a film to be made. And it's also amazing to think that something very similar would happen to the Batman franchise as well, but it shows you just how different of a world it was, that, these films, there was not a lot of confidence in them doing well, and even the Star Wars franchise was never, I don't think 20th Century Fox, after the first one, put any money into it, and then it was really George Lucas who was the one that was funding this. So it's a very different way of making films. And when you look at the history of the Superman franchise, you have to look at, the individual producers themselves who really put the money into this and who casted it. And, DC certainly had a hand in it, but really, this was the individual producers that exhibited a lot of control.
I don't know, it just feels like they kind of wanted this idea of they just felt like they wanted, because again, we're basing this off the doc, they wanted a movie that was just going to make money, and they had no intention originally of, making something memorable or whatever, but then once Richard Donner came aboard, it became like, okay, we have this legacy that we have to live up to. Because it's I think they called him the American, he's kind of like the American myth or legend, he's our American legend, basically.
Well, that's the idea, I think, of a lot of superhero movies, especially the DCs, is that you are talking about gods. And that is kind of our modern mythology, and I know Kevin Smith has used that term a number of times.
Definitely, he's one of my heroes too. So the way they approached it, they felt like Richard Donner at least felt like he had to take it seriously. And then I think, I don't know, we'll talk about it when we discuss Superman 2, but something went off the rails there. And
something certainly went off the rails. It's also worth noting that Richard Donner helped to produce the X-Men franchise. And his wife still gets credit to this day. She has been a producer on all of the X-Men movies up until 2017 and even into 2018. So it's worth noting that he has had a great deal of influence on this world of superhero films. And, we really can't talk about this genre without spending a great deal of time talking about Richard Donner, who is still with us at the age of 87 and has quite the legacy of directing the Superman franchise. He was also huge into the Lethal Weapon franchise, The Omen, The Goonies. This is a guy who was a prolific director of his time. You've got to give him a lot of credit for what he was able to do with Superman.
Yeah, for sure. And it sucks that, with the story of him leaving halfway through Superman 2, because you can tell that he had this singular vision. And then once the other director took over, it's like the vision kind of ended by the end of Superman 2. You kind of see that. And I don't know if we mentioned this already, but I think the original script was what did they say, 500 pages? So they wrote it as one giant script, and I think once we start talking about the story, you can kind of see how I think they should have wrote it as two different movies, because you feel like it's this giant epic, but it plays out more of a show to me, sometimes, because Well, I guess we can mention this now, but like the first 45 minutes, there's no Christopher Reeves.
It's unbelievable to think. I mean, this is just something that would never happen today. Is you did go the first almost hour without really seeing Superman. It's remarkable to think about. But when we start talking about, the story and the heroes and whatnot, the first 15 minutes of this film, it all takes place on Krypton. And part of the visuals, the visual aspect of it, is to just see Krypton visualized. And, you can tell that they are taking this very seriously because Marlon Brando is reciting some lines that could very easily be taken as comedy, but, everybody is taking it very seriously. And that's the first 15 minutes. I mean, even if you look at just the credits themselves really set you up for the film because you've got the John Williams score booming over the credits and the names coming up onto the screen. You've just got to give a lot of credit to the people behind this movie for just really setting the tone right from the beginning with the credits and then with those first 15 minutes on Krypton. Because if you just do a crappy set on Krypton and don't really have any good shots, then people are not going to take this movie seriously.
Like the first 15 minutes are really cool. It's got that Doctor Who kind of vibe, like a 70s Doctor Who kind of vibe, which I'm a fan of. But the only thing I think it lacked was like everything was just so white and plain. But at the same time, I think they did it on purpose because the things that stand out are Superman's cape that he's wrapped up as a baby, which is the only thing in color, and then the kryptonite, which is green, and that it's on the ship that he travels with. So it's just they went with this approach where like they definitely wanted like that sci-fi kind of vibe at the start, and then transition into the normal world. But I did like some of the choices they made. I just felt like they could have done a little more in terms of the color, but the idea is definitely there. I love the whole, like, because, old school 70s visual effects, they basically did, like, the little tiny sets, did zoom in and stuff, and made the world seem much more bigger, and, yeah, and I thought it was kind of funny that, like, he's telling them that the world's going to collapse, like, Krypton's going to blow up, and they're just laughing at him. Or not laughing at him, they just don't take him seriously. It seems kind of weird.
Well, Brian, we always take our scientists clearly. We always believe what they're going to say now. I mean, that's a huge change from 1978. It said 40 years later, we have finally learned that when the scientists tell you that the world is in danger from, I don't know, global climate change, we now know to listen to them and never question what they say.
Yeah. Right.
So, Brian, how are those wildfires going on out there?
They didn't affect me personally, but we got pretty close a couple weeks ago, so yeah, I'm okay. It was pretty ashy for a while, like it was hard to breathe.
Let's talk about Superman. We have to talk about him. He's one of the most important characters, and to do that, we have to talk about Christopher Reeve. And man, it's really sad to talk about Christopher Reeve because of the accident that happened to him in 1995, and basically being paralyzed, and, he was around for a number of years after that. He even did a small part TV show Smallville, but unfortunately we lost him, and it just felt like, in 2017, how revered would Christopher Reeve be for being the original Superman? Just think about that. And think about what kind of a role that he could play as an ambassador, or, even getting into maybe some of the movies as a cameo, or going to comic book conventions and whatnot. It's unbelievable to think about just what Christopher Reeve would be in 2017.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be in that Luke Skywalker type category, the legend, if he were still around. And it sucks the way he died, too. He didn't die, like, because he was paralyzed. Like, it was a complication with his breathing tube. He got infected,
Yeah.
And I felt like, it feels like, man, if they would have just had the, if he had better technology, I guess, but because he died at 99, and I felt like we were on the cusp of
he died much later than that, because he was on episodes of Smallville, and those episodes were in the early 2000s. I'm going to look that up real quick. Yeah,
it sucks because I felt like medical technology has come such a long way that we could have prevented that kind of silly, unnecessary death kind of thing. Because it was just the breathing tube that got fucked up. It's not like, it was even though he was paralyzed, he tried to not make it a thing for him. You know what I mean? Like, he tried to just live his life after that. And
he talked about wanting to walk. And that was something that was very, very important to him.
Yeah, and he just didn't have that chance. And It sucks, man, because if he would have made some cameos in some of these DC movies, it would probably have made it a lot better and lifted him up a bit. But yeah, I mean, I could have seen him play Jonathan Kent all these years later, something like that.
What he was able to do in 1978, I mean, it can't be understated. To be able to play Superman, also being able to play Clark Kent. I mean, really, those are two very distinctive roles, and I am not sure that any actor has ever been able to really differentiate those two. Brandon Routh's performance almost seemed to be like an impersonation of Christopher Reeve, and I have never been particularly impressed with Henry Cavill's interpretation of Superman. So for me, when I think of Superman, to me, it's still Christopher Reeve. I think he's still the actor that has done the best job of illustrating those high points of being both Superman and of being Clark Kent, because he comes across the screen like just a genuinely good person, and that's really hard to fake.
Yeah, and some of those scenes where he's just switches back and forth really quick, and all he does is just like slouches over, talks differently, loses his confidence, and then when he becomes Superman, he's like super confident, standing tall. It's like little things like that. I didn't really see that from Henry Cavill, and I think, when I saw Brandon Routh try that, it just felt like, pretty much an impersonation, and like he was trying to like recreate that role. But sometimes you just got to make it your own, and I think Christopher Reeves made it so much his own that everyone tries to live up to that standard. But you got to just make it your own, man. Because I'm still one of those people that feel like one of the critiques I have for Superman and the character is like, how could you not tell this guy's Clark Kent? Reeves does it in a way where it's like, I guess you can't really tell because he just seems like a totally different like human being as when he's playing Clark Kent compared to being
one of the things that I was reading, and this could very well be bullshit and urban legend, is that when he was dressed as Clark Kent versus when he was dressed as Superman, that people couldn't tell that he was the same person either. Which I'm not sure if I believe that, but if it is true, that's a pretty great story.
Yeah, that's very much some really great acting there, fooling people like that. It was just because, like, in some of those scenes, man, it's just like he's just a totally different person, and he acts like especially that scene where like him and Lois are getting robbed, him and Clark Kent are getting robbed, and instead of just turning into Superman or fighting the criminal, he's just like, you better give him your purse, Lois. I think he means business, kind of thing. He's definitely like, he gets the part that he has to be this other person so no one can figure out that he's Superman in order to like protect the people around him, I guess, kind of thing. So he does it so well, and it really like puts things in perspective of how this character should be treated, because we didn't really get that in like the Man of Steel movies or whatever. Like in Man of Steel, he was just trying to become Superman. Man of Steel or Dawn of Justice, he was just kind of like dealing with the repercussions of being Superman, but we never saw him be.
He was dealing with the ramifications of causing like $7 billion of damage to the city. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's just the dual role thing. The closest we've come to that, I guess, is what Christian Bale's Batman, and that's the closest thing we've come to that. And I think that was kind of missing from the Man of Steel movies.
I think this movie really relies on Christopher Reeve a lot to do the legwork on the superhero side, but I think that his chemistry with Margot Kidder, who plays Lois Lane, this movie relies on that. There is a scene toward the middle of this film when it's just those two characters, and she is interviewing Superman for the newspaper, and that scene is probably the most important in the film. If that scene doesn't work, then the movie doesn't work, because this heavily relies on the romantic connection between those two people.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes too. Their chemistry was so great in that scene where like they were just flirting with each other. I couldn't help but laugh at some of the lines because like, it's
1978. It's going to be cheesy.
I mean, I guess you can see this cheesy now, but when I see those lines that he's pulling off, it's like, damn, that's a good one. Like,
right.
Major props for that. And then like Lois Lane like playing into that, like, what color are my panties? Like, wow, like they got away with that. You can get away with that now, but I was like surprised they got away with that in the 70s kind of thing. But then again, the 70s was that mash of like, Godfather was like an adult property kind of thing, and they kind of get away with this adult joke. And then you kind of get away from that, like it was very like an adult type of scene, you know what I mean? Like, because when I watched that scene as a kid, I really don't have much like, care much for it. But then as I got older and watched the movie, and then watching it recently, it's like, man, this is very much for the adults, and it's really well written, and it's very like flirty, and they really into each other, but they're trying to like not say it, and then he's trying to like not be Clark or like mention or not be Clark, but like trying to not make him think of Clark, because when she mentions Clark, he's like, "Who's that? Your boyfriend?" You know, and it kind of just messes with, and it just adds something to it. So it's like this. It's almost like a love triangle with two people, and I like that dynamic a lot. And that kind of carries over to the second one. You lose that in the third and fourth one, obviously, but I thought that dynamic really is just like it's at its best, especially in this scene. I thought the flying part where they're flying together goes a little too long.
This is a long movie in general. I mean, this movie's over 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 20, and the extended cut that I watched was 2.5 hours. So it's definitely a long one, but I mean, I think the one thing I'll say about the flying, I agree, goes too long, but I think the flying effect works both in this scene and throughout. If you don't believe Superman can fly, then the movie really just is going to fail as well. I mean, I think that's one of the things that Richard Donner and some of the producers were saying throughout, is that they had to make people believe that Superman could fly through some of these effects. Otherwise, people would not take it seriously.
Some of the angles they chose, it helped the effect, because like it kind of, there's this one shot where he kind of like starts flying, but like turns his body, and then in the shot, like the perspective, it's got this weird angle where it's almost as like he's like flying through the screen almost. I don't know if you saw that scene, like where he first starts flying. It's on a weird angle, because like from that angle, it's like you're shooting from the side of the set almost, but it's like he's almost flying offset through the screen. So I really liked a lot of the shots they chose. I thought the one thing that Man of Steel does do better with the flying, though, was the breaking of the sound barrier. But they didn't even think of that back then, you know? Like, that wasn't even like a thought.
Right. In 1978, we have to make sure that Superman can fly and it looks good.
They even mentioned, like, he doesn't even know how fast he can go. He just goes. Like, he doesn't even time himself yet. So, and that kind of ties in with the final scenes of the movie where he goes back in time. But, yeah, him flying, it's not about him being super fast in this movie. They're like, I don't even think they mentioned faster than the speeding bullet in this movie. It's all about him just flying around, like, kind of saving people and then testing his strength later on in the other films.
No, I mean, this is very much an origin story. And, you know, I think briefly we could talk about Perry White. I think he has a couple of good scenes when he's yelling at the entire newsroom. That reminded me of kind of an early version of when J.K. Simmons was in the Spider-Man movies. It reminded me of that. So, yeah, I thought Jackie Cooper as Perry White, he just did a really solid job of yelling at people when he needed to and just being a good supporting actor.
Yeah, I love those. I think it was when he was like, I need this interview, right? Or this is going to be the biggest interview since God or whatever, interviewing Jesus or something.
God interviewed Moses.
Yeah. He really, like, brought that to life. Yeah, a lot of the side characters are just really good. I love Ned Beatty, man. God, he was so good.
Interesting. You see, I'm not as big. I really didn't like the Otis Lex Luthor. This is a good transition into talking about villains. Lex Luthor and Otis. It seemed very cartoonish to me.
Yeah, I get that, but Ned Beatty's just so fucking good, man.
No, he is good. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Network?
Yes.
His ending monologue in Network is. I think he got an Academy Award nomination specifically because of that scene.
Otis, man, I really like that character a lot.
Okay, so since you like it, why don't you talk about him?
Because like his comic timing is just so good. Like it's the little things, you know. With a side character like that, you need him like to deliver. For example, Ant-Man, right? What's his name? The Hispanic guy that wouldn't stop talking. Like it reminded me of that a little bit, where he's just this comic relief and he just knocks it out of the park. Like he gives him, he's like, put on my bat or give me my robe, and he gives him the robe, but he's still in the pool, kind of thing. Like, come on, it's those little things you can't do. I mean, you can do that nowadays, and I don't think it gets as big a laugh. But I'm one of those guys that like appreciates like old school kind of laugh. Like I really like old school comedies, like old school comedies, like Some Like It Hot. I really like, and that was what 15, 20 years later. But still, like it's that type of comedy that you don't do anymore. That old school Hollywood type of comedy.
The Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy. Marx Brothers are great. I love the Marx Brothers.
Yeah, and then you know even going back Charlie Chaplin, but this was more of that kind of style where it's just like borderline slapstick. He's a side character, but I feel like he doesn't get enough love in this movie, and that's why I wanted to like put him out there because he was just so good. And then Gene Hackman, I think he's definitely the best Luthor. There's no doubt about it. Out of the three Luthor. We've had three Luthors, right?
We've had Jesse Eisenberg, I mean, if you're going only by film,
Yeah, then it's
Jesse Eisenberg, Kevin Spacey, and Gene Hackman. And
Yeah,
if
those
you are
three.
only evaluating film, Gene Hackman is by far the best.
definitely. And I loved how he had wigs on, hiding his hair. I thought that was a great character trait.
Well, Gene Hackman wasn't wearing the wigs.
Well, yeah, right. But yeah, Lex Luthor had this wig thing going on, which explained the baldness. I really thought it was interesting that in this one, Lex Luthor is already an established supervillain, right? Or not a supervillain, but he's like an established criminal.
He's already a criminal, yes.
Yeah, and the other ones, there's some like cartoons that I've seen where he becomes a criminal just because Superman comes out and he's like antagonized by Superman, kind of thing, to the point where he wants to become a criminal. That's what we kind of got with Jesse Eisenberg, which I didn't really like. But yeah, he's just so good.
I just
He's
think
very funny.
I think it's logistically difficult to do an origin story for a superhero and a villain. And if you were going to do the origin for a villain too, it just makes it really hard. And you can see that in some of the Batman movies, and we'll talk about that. Just you can't do an origin for both. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah, and I think we only see Luthor in his lair, right, the whole time. That's it. And then
Yeah,
the jail
there's
at the
the
end.
ending scene at the jail, but for the most part, yeah, the only time we see him is when he is in his lair. Oh, there's a scene where they go out to the desert.
Oh yeah,
They
yeah,
go
that
out
too.
into outside and change the code on the nuclear weapons.
Right. But yeah, it's very limited. If you think about the structure of the movie too, like we said, the first 45 minutes is all origin story. I really love that kid that played young Clark Kent. I really loved the way he kind of portrayed it. I loved how he had this discussion with his father about not being cocky, and then go back to Luthor. It's like we only see like Christopher Reeves and all them, like the modern cast, for like 90 minutes. So it's almost like two different movies within it, a 45-minute origin story movie and then a 90-minute Superman movie. So I felt like we kind of got shortchanged on like more Lex Luthor scenes. And then I was hoping, like, before I saw Superman 2 when I was little, that, I just expected Lex Luthor to be the villain in the second one, obviously. But he wasn't really, like, the main villain in the second one. So I felt like Luthor, kind of gets shortchanged in the two movies because of the time. But I felt like the time that he was in, he was just great. Fantastic.
It's hard to do that Luthor-Superman dynamic in the movies. It just... Because Luthor's superpower is that he's rich, and Superman obviously has his own powers. It's really hard to do it in a movie, though. I mean, you really have to establish very strong performances by both. And, it would almost play off better in a TV show where you could really build it. And obviously that's what Smallville was doing with Lex and Clark. But in a movie, that's really hard to do.
Basically, the reason that Gene Hackman just really wants to get rid of Superman because he's going to get in the way of his plan. It's not like he hates Superman as a person. He's just in the way of his plan. That was kind of missing because the Lex Luthor I know, deep down, everything he does is to get rid of Superman one way or another. And you don't really get that here. It's just more of like him becoming the biggest real estate mogul ever by blowing up.
He's basically he's a James Bond villain, basically. That's his whole plan could easily have been inserted into a James Bond movie.
I get that vibe too, especially the trope of, explaining your plan to the guy who's going to thwart your plan, kind of thing. In
That's exactly what he does, doesn't he?
Yeah. But it's forgivable. Story structure back then, obviously Bond movies had an influence on that kind of story structure, so they kind of took it from there. But it would have been nice if he would not explain the plan and then,
well, it's one of those things. He's not explaining it to Superman. You're explaining it to the audience so that the audience understands what he's doing because, let's be honest, the plan's a little bit convoluted.
Very true. So basically he wants to launch a nuke in the San Andreas fault line and kill me and my family and everyone along the West Coast and then create a new West Coast amongst, the meth part of Central California.
It's amazing to think he's just going to blow up Los Angeles and San Francisco, and his real estate earnings on the coast will. It's it's very good. It's capitalism at its best, really. That's all you can say about his plan.
If someone were to do that now, someone probably would get away with it because of the fucking type of society we're living in now, with the rich people getting the 1%.
It would be Elon Musk is our Lex Luthor right now.
That's how you see it, huh?
Anyway, so when we talk about the story, we're really talking about, I would say, you said two, I would say almost three distinct parts. You've got the first part that's on Krypton, the second part, which is in Smallville, Kansas, and then the third part, which is, of course, your Superman story where Lex Luthor's trying to blow up the West Coast, and Superman has to save the day, and at first he is unable to save Lois, but eventually he is able to because he literally moves time backwards so that he can do it, violating one of the tenets that his father told him never to interfere with human history, but Superman does not listen to his father and moves back time so that he can continue to flirt and potentially make sweet, sweet love to Lois Lane.
Yeah, I just felt like that is so ridiculous. That was one of the things that brings this movie down for me. The story's really good up until that point. I can forgive the whole San Andreas fault line thing, but this was just so wacky.
If I were to tell you, I don't know if this is going to make it better or worse, the original ending of this first movie was supposed to be Superman throwing the nuclear weapon. Lois does not die, but the nuclear weapon hits Zod and his people out of the Phantom Zone, and that was the original ending of the first one. The ending of the second one was supposed to be Superman going back in time so as to delete the final 2 days. Lois knows that Superman is Clark Kent. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's better. I really think that's better because, like, that original ending for Superman 1 makes so much sense because at least in Superman 2, I don't know. After the movie, I got this thought that, like, maybe him going back in time and then the consequences of that are going to be Zod coming in. So if he never goes back in time,
no,
Zod
it has nothing to do with Zod.
So yeah, that's what I thought. And then and afterwards, like, maybe it has nothing to do with that, and they just went back in time because they didn't want to kill Lois. I thought Lois dying would have been such a, I don't know, bold move, and then you can move on to...
I would argue too bold. For 1978, too bold. Yeah.
Too bold for 1978. This is not Star Wars The Last Jedi. You got it.
Right. No, I don't think it... I just don't think it works. Fundamentally, I don't think this is that... This is not that movie.
Because him screaming at the end felt like, man, if she would have died, it would have set the whole course for his, like, story arc of him, like, trying to redeem himself and not trying to make the same mistakes as before. But instead he just goes back in time by turning the Earth backwards. And I didn't even like that, the whole Earth going backwards thing. The way I interpret it, it's almost like he went into the Speed Force or some shit like that. Because everything after turning the world backwards, like, there's no... I guess he stops everything. Like, he stops the nuke, he stops Lex Luthor, and then all of a sudden you just see Lois in her car. I thought it was just so weird, and, like, all this weird stuff, and, like, what happened to, like, the nuke and all that stuff. But it just threw me off. That was the only thing, and, like, it really throws me off, and it kind of hurts my story rating for that. But yeah, yes. Even as a kid, I was just like, what is going on? Like, did he really, like, turn the Earth around?
I mean, the ending of this movie is very convoluted, and it was a production thing. They just ran out of time. They had to get this movie out, and that's why they just moved the ending up. And because of this, I think you really get bad endings for both movies, because I don't like Superman 2's ending either. I actually think Superman 2's ending is worse.
As I recall, he just beats... I have to watch it again, obviously, but he just beats Zod in them, and that was it, and then...
He kisses Lois to make her forget.
Oh, right, because they had that whole thing about him dropping Superman for like 30 minutes. Yeah, yes. That's all coming back to me now. Fuck. Yeah, there's definitely like some flaws that it could have been a lot better. And I think the idea of going in with two movies really was kind of the wrong... I mean, I get it. Like, they were trying to maximize it and, you know, pull off two movies while they could, but it really affects the story because now it just feels like they had to stop the movie. Because, like, even the plot of Luthor's plan, like, you don't find out about that until, like, the last half hour of the movie.
Right.
Usually a good, like, plot is, like, you find out the villain's plot at the beginning of the movie and then him trying to carry it out throughout the movie. Here it's just, like, he just comes up with this plan all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, but...
It's like he looked at his watch, determined there was an hour left in the movie. It's like, well, I guess I better do something, huh?
Yeah, and that's kind of what they did, and that kind of affects it because it starts out so good, and then it the Lois Lane scene was great, and then as soon as all that's done, like once you turn to the third act, it becomes this rushed kind of thing, and that kind of affects it.
Which is fitting because there's a lot of, I mean, the same thing happens in a lot of comic book movies, including Wonder Woman. So it keeps it starts the tradition at least, especially when you have origin stories. Whenever you have an origin story, it's really hard to. We're going to tell the story of this superhero and why he or she became one, and we're going to also have a plot. It's nearly impossible to do that.
Yeah, because you're going to have a lot of hits and misses, and I would say this Superman movie has more hits than misses, but you start seeing more of the misses towards Superman 2 when it all just kind of falls apart.
Right, and the one thing I'll say for this first Superman is I think it does a really good job of establishing the characters. I think that all of the performances are very good. I think the dialogue is generally very good. And I think we have to talk about the visuals because, as I stated before, when you start in Krypton, I think it looks very good. I think when they go to Kansas, just the way that it's established as a kind of a Norman Rockwell painting, I think Kansas looks great and it's perfect for what they're trying to do. And the way that they even make Metropolis look. I think Metropolis looks very good, and a lot of what they did was use New York City, of course. That just makes sense. I think the visuals of this film are just overall very, very strong. And, obviously watching this with 2017 eyes, Superman flying doesn't look great, but, I mean, when you put in everything comes into context, from a visual standpoint, I mean, Superman just looks great. Every scene has almost this dream quality to it. There's almost like this haze that's in every shot, but, I think it really works.
Like, starting out, I didn't really like the color on Krypton, like I said before. Everything is just so white, but I guess the emphasis was, when they put the blanket around Clark, or Kal-El or whatever, it's in this bright color and it sticks out, so there's some reasoning for that. I just felt like they could have done a little more with the color on that, and then I think you're right on the money with Kansas. That shot of the fields, him in the wheat fields, looking out like that into the horizon, that very much like Luke Skywalker looking to the horizon kind of shot.
And Justice League, I think, went for a very similar shot.
Definitely. And I think this pulled it off a little better, actually, just because in Justice League it seemed like there was this cloudiness to the shot. But
naturally, this one, thank you, Zack Snyder.
Yeah, but in this one, it's very bright. The colors are vivid. You see the wheat, the color of the wheat in the fields is very vivid. I love that. And then once you get to Metropolis, it's very much. I think there's an emphasis on buildings for a reason. A lot of shots of buildings, a lot of tall buildings, and then tall buildings flying through them kind of vibe. That there's kind of a visual connectivity there that I kind of picked up on. The suits are great, that style of the 70s. Even in the Kansas stuff, I love the car. I love the way they dressed in the high school kind of thing. I thought that was great. I thought the costumes just kind of nailed it and really elevated it. And this was kind of the first time we saw the Superman suit the way it is, right? Before it was just black and white TV, kind of muted down. And this was the first time we kind of saw it the way it is in the comics, where it's bright and red and blue, and the suit was pretty that's the iconic suit for me, even more than the suits now, because the suits now are very again, muted colors, a darker blue, darker red, but this was bright blue, or not a bright blue, but the red, it very much sticks out. And then you got the yellow on the cape. I love that. I like the whole he's wearing underwear. Isn't he wearing underwear over the thing that? That was very much a controversial thing in the newer movies. They took that away, but I just love this visual look. This is the classic Superman look. I think if you see a lot of Halloween costumes, this is the look that everyone goes for when they dress up in their costume. It's not the Man of Steel hyped up, look. Maybe if you get a kid's costume, but when all the adults, men and women who dress as Supergirl as well, they go for this look, and it's a reason.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of Henry Cavill's suit. I know it's a weird thing to say, but I've never been a fan of it. The muted colors, Superman, to me, I mean, the intention is that you want his suit to be very colorful. Batman, his suit is meant to be very muted. But when you're comic book characters, I think just overall, I don't think movies do a good enough job of having color costumes. I've never been a fan of the way the X-Men costumes have been done.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that X-Men movie where they do the colors of the 90s show. And I'm hoping Disney's going to bring that to us. Crossing fingers.
It'll be the one good thing Disney does as part of this deal.
Yeah, hopefully. But, I love the look of the suit and everything in the buildings in the city. Even the way that, like, Lois Lane's dressed, she's got that, like, snazzy 70 women's kind of, business suit kind of thing going on for some of the scenes. I dig that. The whole visual presentation of it, I liked it a lot. And worked on a budget kind of thing, I think, because this was definitely not on the level of Star Wars, which was 2 years before, or a year before that. Some similar ideas with, like, especially with Krypton with the sets, and they built the small sets and shoot them from, far away and make it seem bigger and that kind of thing. So,
I've never done a budget comparison, but obviously when you consider the salaries of Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando, my guess is that this movie technically was more expensive. You also have the fact that these are two movies and not one.
Very true. They're budgeted as two movies too. So I definitely think that this has the best look at all of them for sure in terms of like the suit. You kind of get that in Superman 2, like I said, because it's the same crew, the same cinematographer and all that. No one gets close to this anymore. Maybe Smallville could have done that, because I remember watching a little bit of Smallville, but then after a while I was like, where's Superman? I want Superman. And that's what Smallville didn't give us. But they could have. They could have given us that look too. They kind of gave us the blue and red blur. I feel like this is like the standard.
And of course we have to talk about the legacy. I mean, I think we've talked about the story, visuals, the heroes, villains. 40 years ago, I mean, it was a big deal to make a movie like this. And so much of what you see in this first Superman, you will see in other superhero movies, having a villain who is probably the most famous person in the movie. I mean, that's something that continued on into Batman when you had Jack Nicholson, when you had Ian McKellen as Magneto, Willem Dafoe in Spider-Man. You even had Robert Redford in one of the Captain America movies. So this is something that has continued. This legacy continues. And, obviously turning this into a franchise and trying to make this into multiple sets of films. Brian, I will point out to you that this movie literally sets up the sequel for Superman 2 in the very first scene.
Yep.
How amazing is that? To watch?
It's weird because when you watch it, you think that these are the villains of the movie.
Right.
But they're not. They're not until the second movie. Again, it's the thing about having the big script that kind of holds them back. Because they had this idea of one giant epic in two movies. That was the kind of the issue with that. Like, I don't know. Looking back, would you show them?
I don't think it really makes a lot of sense to film multiple movies. There is only one instance that I can think of where it actually worked, and that was Lord of the Rings.
That was very much clear. They knew what they had to do, and the story was already written.
And that's a miracle. The Matrix sequels were filmed together. I don't think that particularly worked. Back to the Future sequels were filmed together. Don't think that worked. The Hobbit, I don't think that worked at all. So, just as a general rule, I don't think filming multiple movies at one time works out for anyone.
Yeah, they kind of did that with Justice League and Batman vs Superman, because I didn't realize that the production was so close with the two films until I read recently. Had the same effect too. It was one giant vision, and then it holds you back because you try to stick to that vision, and sometimes you need to make changes and you don't even realize that it's too late. So
it's really difficult. But, overall, The legacy of this, I would say, is very positive, because so many movies have been influenced and I think continue to be influenced by this. If you look at the plot of the first Spider-Man movie, I think in a lot of ways it's very similar if you look at the romantic dynamics. And, there's so many other movies that have followed the same pattern. And quite frankly, one of the legacies of this film is that I don't think anybody has ever made as good of a Superman movie as this one, and we'll get into that later. But what else do you have to say about legacy and kind of where it falls in the pantheon of superhero history?
I feel like without this, there might have been no shot at Batman 89. I mean, if they never did this, if this fails, there's definitely no Batman 89, right? That's almost certain.
I mean, probably not in 1989. I mean, I think eventually we will get superhero movies at some point, just because I think it was destined to happen at some point. I just think it would have probably taken an even longer time for it to develop.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I get. It's going to be remembered, especially like small things too. Like people are going to remember Terrence Stamp as Zod for like the longest time. I can't explain why. When I see Zod, like, and I see him in Superman 2, I kind of get it, but I don't know. I don't feel like the Terrence Stamp love, but people love Terrence freaking Stamp. I can't explain it, and I know you've heard this too, right?
It's always one of those things you can always tell how influential a movie is, depending on when an actor dies, where does it come in their obituary. And I would argue that there's 3 actors, probably 4 actors, that this is going to be the first line in their obituary. For Christopher Reeve, for Margot Kidder, for Gene Hackman, and for Terrence Stamp.
Definitely. And I just feel like, especially like Lex Luthor, man, like the legacy of that is going to be hard because you feel like a lot of people are going to try to be this funny, witty, smart. I'm going to, very much. I don't know if you watch the Flash series now. Are you watching the Flash series?
No, I'm not.
Okay, there's a character on there now where it's basically like he's almost like a Lex Luthor type character. He's called the Thinker, and you compare the 2 characters, and it's very much like, yeah, they're getting a lot from Lex Luthor. The idea that you're trying to outsmart the guy at every move, kind of thing, and I'm smarter than you, and even like belittles his what do you call it? His henchman, the woman in the bed. So there's that legacy of like character structure, and then the legacy of how a villain should be and how all these villains want to be. There's definitely that, and it's just because it's one of the first, it's just going to be remembered as like setting the bar. It didn't set the bar too high
for Superman. For every superhero except Superman, it set the bar way too high.
Yeah, but that's a good thing then, because now it's not like it's never going to live up to the Superman. There's always hope that they're going to make another Superman movie that could be better, I feel, and they just kind of miss out on some opportunities, and then it doesn't add up in the end, and you kind of get lesser movies. Like I still like Man of Steel, but comparing these two, like this is on a different level.
I can't wait to have the Man of Steel conversation because we are going to be very divergent in our viewpoints.
For me, it's just like I love the Krypton on Man of Steel more than the Krypton in this movie.
It's funny you mentioned that. I like that Krypton too when it was called Naboo in The Phantom Menace.
Oh, come on now. It gave me what I wanted from, because in Man of Steel, like they give you more of a visual for Krypton, I feel, and that's what I felt was lacking in this one, because like Krypton seems so plain at times, but futuristic yet plain and simple, but that was kind of the vibe they were going for. And then a Man of Steel, like this Krypton is like super advanced, and it's kind of like what I imagined it to be. So that was kind of like the things that got me on the Man of Steel like bandwagon for that one. But yeah, overall, it's gonna be known for Christopher Reeves. It's gonna be known for, I mean, a lot of people that watched that movie as a kid like in theaters, still hold it as a high regard, and they still like the line of. You'll believe that a man can fly kind of thing, right? That was the whole draw.
I mean, that was the marketing of the movie.
And it's still like a lasting thing that people still say that and remember it kind of thing. Just a lot of little things too. And then even the look of Superman is just this lasting thing. Like I said before, like that's the ideal look and that's what it's going to be known for. And like, especially like the curl in the front when he turns into Superman, then when he's not Superman, he turns his hair back.
Yeah, the curl is, I mean, I think every actor's tried to do something like that too, right?
Yeah, every single one, and every time I see a costume, the guy always tries to do it. I even tried to do it when I dressed as Superman, but my hair couldn't do it, but I tried. But, that's the look that everyone wants to go for when doing a Superman or dressing up as Superman. That's going to be the lasting legacy for me, is the visual look and the way that it makes you feel and the way that, like, man, they did a good movie and it makes you feel like a kid, kind of.
All right, Brian, so we're going to end every show with 5 burning questions about the movie. Question 1. How necessary is the first hour of this film up until the point they get to Metropolis?
God, it's like, I wish that was its own movie. I felt like, I don't know, I felt like that was my favorite part of the whole thing. Other than
the first hour is basically a prologue. The actual plot is not...
it's like it's prologue, and then it's like the rest of the movie. Like it's like I said, 2 separate movies: a 45-minute origin story movie, and then a 90-minute Christopher Reeves movie. But it's so important, man, and I wish that. I don't know. I guess that's kind of why people like Smallville, I guess, because the way that Kansas looked and all that kind of thing, and that hometown kind of feel, and the way that he was just kind of like struggling with not showing off. I love that. I love that whole discussion he has with his dad before his dad dies. Man, I love those first 45 minutes a lot. Whatever hour, whatever it's called. I think it's so crucial, so necessary that it's like the heart of the character. Without that, you just jump into like the first Christopher Reeves moments. You kind of lose a major part of the character by not seeing that, and I think it's necessary.
So from a plot standpoint, it really isn't important, but from a film standpoint and establishing maybe the credibility, it is extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you could just start out the movie with Christopher Reeves, but I don't think you get that emotional connection, especially like when he's discovering himself. Like that's like the heart of like every super like hero character that doesn't know it's their past and you're trying to figure out your place in the world. It's crucial to me in the story. I mean, you can just start at the movie and just have Christopher Reeves and be Superman, but it's not going to have a big emotional connection for me. So I think, to me, it's necessary. You can do without it, but I think you get a lesser movie.
Is the Lois Superman scene cheesy as hell?
No, because I think they just clicked so well. Their chemistry was just so good. When she's interviewing a man, God, it's just so charming. And Christopher Reeves, you get that charm that you don't get with like Henry Cavill. You know, he's just so freaking charming, and she's just so into him, and they're just into each other. It's great, and I don't think it comes off cheesy. I think people who like are not in the aesthetic of watching older movies from like the 60s and 70s in that style, I don't think they're gonna get it. So, and I know there's like people like that, but for me who watches old movies and stuff and gets that aesthetic, it's like it kind of reminds me of Cary Grant and whatever leading lady he's with. You know what I mean? Like something like that where they're just like clicking with lines and stuff. That's to me not cheesy. It's just like, you know, old school Hollywood romance, and that can be okay.
I think it works. I agree with you. Is this the best Superman film ever made?
Yes. I wouldn't say by a whole lot, but it's definitely like better than the rest by a good margin, you know. I think number 2 would be, I don't know, I want to say Man of Steel, but I think you're going to hate me for that. And then 3 would be Superman.
It doesn't matter if I hate you. It's about what do you think?
Yeah, I just feel like Man of Steel almost got to this point, but Superman just does it better. They took their time. They didn't try anything too crazy. I think Man of Steel overthinks a lot of stuff, and that whole DC universe overthinks a lot of stuff. They just got it right with this one. But then once the other director takes over, then it falls off the rails. But together, and it works, and that's why it's the best.
We'll discuss the Richard Lester legacy. But yes, I agree with you. I think this is by far, I don't think it's particularly close. I don't think number 2 or any other movie comes even close. Is Christopher Reeves the best Superman?
Yeah, definitely. Even though I feel like Henry Cavill definitely has the aesthetic better, like the look. Because whenever I read a comic book or a story about Superman, my visual is like a big, like, muscular guy, but he doesn't like know or feel like he feels like a smaller person. You know what I mean? Because he feels like he was born like a big dude, and he can't help but be a big guy, and he can't help but be too strong, and sometimes like be, you know, kind of bubbling around kind of thing. Because that's the vibe I get when I read the comic For All Seasons, and that was like Superman year 1, and like the vibe I got is like he's this guy that can't help but be big and strong, and so because of the way he is, he feels like, well, I was born this way for a reason. I was made this way for a reason, so I have to help people. Yeah, that's kind of like how I feel like the character should be, and kind of Christopher Reeves gets that, but at the same time, he was not like jacked to the gills. But at the time in '78, I don't think he needed that. But now I feel like it's kind of part of the aesthetic, because like a scrawny Superman, I don't think works in today's age, but in '78 it worked. So him like physically embodying the character, he's almost got it, but if he had some more time, maybe he was on the juice or something. I hate to say that, but yeah.
You're telling me actors go on steroids in HGH, Brian? I do not believe you.
Well, I mean, in '78, yeah, sure. I mean, questionable, but now, yeah.
By the way, do you realize that Christopher Reeve, his trainer, was David Prowse, the man who played Darth Vader?
Oh, yeah. I remember that from the talk. I was like, holy shit. Yeah, because that dude who played Darth Vader is huge. So it makes sense. And
yes,
then Christopher Reeves had to gain a lot of weight, and I felt like, given more time, if he had more training, he could have been even.
If you look at him in the screen test versus in the film, it's actually pretty amazing how much bigger he looks. It is impressive, how much bigger he looks. And, of course, he's the best Superman from a physical and from a... If you put the whole... Putting everything together, of course, he's the best.
No one will ever top his Clark Kent. I don't think anyone can. You got to be super humble and super confident in like such a duality kind of way that it really takes a really talented actor to pull it off. And
I don't think you can either. I think it's so hard to do that.
Like the closest I felt we got, like I said before, was like the Batman Christian Bale, where he was kind of playing that in Dark Knight and Batman Begins, where he's playing the playboy, and he knows that he has to play the role of the playboy in order to like hide the identity. And this is very much that, but he's playing very much the role of like a nerd, homie kind of guy, gives half his paycheck to his mother kind of guy, good old boy. And it's so much so that Lois Lane can't see Superman within him, you know?
Yeah.
But
you're telling me Val Kilmer didn't get that?
He tried to. He tried. He even talks about it, but no one comes close. And it's going to be hard, man. And I don't even think, as good as the cartoon movies are, nothing comes close to the Clark Kent that we get from Christopher Reeves.
Certainly not. Why is Superman such a difficult character to adapt? I mean, I think you go with the obvious, such as he really can't be hurt unless he has kryptonite, so you kind of have to put other people in danger. I think that's a huge part of the issue. What else?
Well, for me, like I've had this discussion before with a friend of mine who he likes superhero movies a lot, but he really dislikes Superman a lot for that reason. He feels like he's hard to connect with because of that fact that he's so invincible that he can't be hurt or whatever. But for me, like, I think it's hard because, I don't know, some people see it as like, I think there's good-hearted people in the world, right? Truth, justice, and the American way, as he puts it, right? Some people are just cynical, and they see Superman as this guy that's like, come on, don't give me this goody two-shoes. You know, give me a real gritty character. And I think that's what Zack Snyder conflicted with, and when he tried to write the character, and the way it turned out. It's just hard because people want certain things out of that character. For me personally, I want a guy that's humble, yet strong and confident, like the way Christopher Reeves does it, but also, like I mentioned before, like the physical role of, like, you can't help but being big, because I have that feeling a lot, too. I'm a big dude, and I bump into stuff, and, like, sometimes I'll, like, break things because I do things too hard and too strong. And I get that feeling like, oh, man, I kind of feel bad for being so big and strong, but at the same time, because of that, you're able to help, you know? And there's kind of like a burden to that of being like a strong person and helping. And that's kind of the vibe I get from Superman. And that's kind of what I want out of a Superman character. But some people don't like the fact that you can't be hurt. And it's very hard to adapt. And this isn't the closest thing we're going to get to it. But I feel within time, give it time, I think if you stick with, like, instead of just one writer, maybe you need a couple writers together.
I think you need a director who actually likes Superman. I think that's part of the problem. Zack Snyder does not like the character. And I think you have to find someone. There have been rumors about Matthew Vaughn. I think that if he likes the character, that's what they need. And I just don't know if you're going to be able to find that. It's going to be really difficult. Because like you said, I think people connect with Batman pretty easily. And I think there's a ton of directors who are always interested in making Batman. You know, Darren Aronofsky talked about making one. You know, Matthew Reeves is going to be doing his version. I think Zack Snyder prefers Batman to Superman. So I think there's always going to be people who want to do that. I think it's going to be really hard to find someone for Superman.
Yeah, and especially like now that the character's known for being this big, muscular dude, it's hard to find big, muscular dudes that can work if you get the joke.
Right. It's hard to find big, muscular unknowns who can also pull this kind of performance off, because you are essentially playing two characters. And I've never gotten that two-character vibe from Henry Cavill at all.
It's always been one to me.
Yeah, I've never seen him as two. And I could say the same thing about Brandon Routh, too. I never really got that difference. And, you know, I feel like I buried Brandon Routh. I've actually enjoyed him when he's been on the DC shows, when I have seen him on. So I've actually appreciated his TV work, but not a fan of him in Superman Returns.
Yeah, and once we discuss that movie, it's
a movie that only gets creepier with the more the time goes by and the more we learn about noted sexual predator Bryan Singer. Let's go over our scores for this first Superman movie, Heroes. So we're going to do each of these out of 10. If we get above 80, we're going to put this in our Superhero Pantheon Hall of Fame. If we get below 20, which I don't think we will, we put it in the pile of shame. So, Brian, out of 10, what was your hero score?
Give it a 9.
I gave it a 9 as well. Villains.
I'm going with an 8.
I am going with a 7 just because I am not a huge fan of Otis and the Lex Luthor dynamic. But Lex Luthor himself is excellent.
Definitely.
Story,
I will give a 7 because of the
I am right there
ending.
with you on that.
Yeah, because of the ending, it just went off the rails, it felt like.
Now, if we were to take away the first 45 minutes and we just had the last 90 minutes, what do you think your score would be?
Whew.
I'd probably say a 6, maybe a 5.
Maybe a 6. Because it just goes so far off the rails with the time travel thing. Like,
Yes.
it's just way off the rails, I think.
Visuals. And again, people, just keep in mind what we are talking about within the context of 1978. We are never evaluating the visuals based off of 2017. Keep that in mind.
I will go with an 8.
I'm going to go with a 9. I think I like the Krypton scene just a little bit more than you did.
Yeah, it just seems like the plain white was just so... I don't know how you feel about that, but it was just so
No,
plain.
I thought it was brilliant. Using that color scheme, I think it really just... You starting off with the plain white, then going to, Kansas, and then going to Metropolis. From a color standpoint, I think it just worked out perfectly. Legacy.
Legacy, I will give it 10.
Yep. I don't think you really argue. I mean, this movie just started the superhero genre and really got it off to a good start. And I can't see giving anything less than a 9. But I mean, really, this is a 10. This is definitely few movies that I'm going to give a 10 for Legacy.
Yeah. Especially like I talked about the look a lot. It's a cultural thing. Like, I see people in 2017 dress as Christopher Reeve Superman. Like, still.
And when we talk about Legacy in the future, I mean, marketing is obviously going to play. Superman. They didn't really talk about when we talk about Batman, we will be talking a lot more about how that particular film was marketed. So what your total score was?
Which brings it to 42 on my end.
So our totals are the same, 42, so that will be an 84. And thus we are putting this is our first movie to go into the Superhero Pantheon Hall of Fame. And I cannot think of a better first movie to put in. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, 84. So I guess that's going to be what... because our score is 80 and above, so 84 might end up being... I wonder if that's going to be the average that we end up hitting on a lot of these that end up in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, I can certainly think of a couple movies that I am going to give 90s to.
I mean, what we think is a good movie in 78, if we watched this in 78, it would have had no legacy, right? Looking back now, it definitely...
Even if we went back to 1988, 10 years later, this would have had no legacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the only superhero movies that we had were Superman movies. We didn't even have the first Batman movie at that point. If we were having this conversation at this point in 1988, the Michael Keaton being casted as Batman news would have just come out.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. Holy shit. Put that into perspective. But that's another anniversary we can fucking tie into, I guess.
Right.
So that makes more sense.
Certainly Batman, we will be discussing that movie next week. The 1989 version, the Tim Burton Batman, is what we will be discussing next week. And I am very interested to see what our scores are for this one. Because with Batman, you have a lot more Batman. There's a lot. I mean, just on the internet in general, there's a lot more Batman discussion. There's a lot more good Batman movies, a lot of good Batman performances. There's a lot to discuss with the 1989 Batman and comparing it to all of these other versions. So this is going to be, I think this is going to be a lot more complicated.
Yeah, and I can already kind of see the complications of the score with me, because as much as I like that Batman movie, the plot, I don't know, it's not as strong to go with it, but we'll get there. We'll talk about it next week.
So Brian, I want to thank you for doing this. Any final thoughts before we call it a day?
Yeah, if any director or writer wants to try Superman again, I know they want to do another Man of Steel sequel. I think they just got to give it some time, and you got to think with the approach of like, don't get so serious and don't overcomplicate things. It doesn't have to be that dark. You know, Superman is a character that can be lighthearted. He may be hated by some people, but in the end, you can have these rewarding moments with the character, you know, and you kind of get that with some of the animated movies that go back to the Christopher Reeves kind of version. So there's hope out there. Just we haven't seen a lot of it lately, but hopefully with Zack Snyder gone, DC will just overhaul and hopefully give us another Superman movie that's worthy of, you know, Christopher Reeves.
Vicky Vale.
Hi. Bruce Wayne.
And what do you do for a living?
I'd like you to handle this operation personally. Me?
Nice outfit.
Hold on a second. I can't make it then either. I've got a very important meeting today.
Don't kill me! Don't kill me! Don't kill me, man! What are you? A Batman.
Well, Brian, this is a week that I know that you have very much been looking forward to, and I've been looking forward to. It's week 2. We're discussing Batman. There's a lot to get to with this film. Everything from talking about the casting to talking about the marketing. Brian, opening thoughts on this film.
Man, looking back, because I was literally 1 year old when this movie came out. I was born in '88. So I remember being 4 years old and being in the theater for Batman Returns. And, like, just being like, whoa, this is, like, kind of like, what is going on? It's kind of dark and stuff. And then as I got older, I watched the original Batman, and I kind of got the same feelings, but I felt like this Batman, I don't know, it's the closest that we're ever going to get to, like, the balance of, like, the artistic visual darkness of, like, Gotham City as a whole mixed with, like, the brooding character kind of thing. But, like, they kind of missed the whole, like, intention of the character, because we never actually hear Batman in this one say, like, why he's going out and fighting crime. It's just, like, he's just Batman. Like, I'm rich, my parents died, I'm Batman. And that's kind of, like, how it is in this movie. And it didn't really, like, hit the home run that I thought it could have. I think if it kind of worked on the script a little bit, it would have been like this massive home run that Dark Knight kind of became. The one thing that this movie does have over Dark Knight for sure is the art and the artistic vision of the whole movie and stuff. But that's kind of like why they chose Tim Burton, I think, because Tim Burton was very much that visual style, and they wanted to emulate that comic book dark style, and they saw his work, and they felt that, like, he could probably do that. They saw Beetlejuice with Michael Keaton and how he was able to, like, take a whole different perspective on the world and kind of, like, bring it to life with the world of the dead and Beetlejuice. So taking that and then approaching Batman, he definitely got the look down. The story doesn't really, like, hold up as much, I think. I think there's a lot lacking. It feels like, I don't know, sometimes it looks like Michael Keaton's bored sometimes in this movie, but overall it doesn't have a lasting legacy. I mean, the media campaign and the toys and stuff. Like, I was going back and watching those videos and just, like, how big the toys were and stuff, which is really interesting because this movie doesn't really feel like it connects with kids, you know? Like, it's very much like a movie for adults and, like, older teens and stuff. They marketed this so heavily to kids just to get the kids to come. So they did everything in their power to make this a big summer blockbuster feel. This was like the big blockbuster movie of 1989. It definitely got the money. I feel like it would have had more of a lasting legacy, I think, had the plot have been a little bit better. But yeah, just, you know, the stuff going into it, the casting, like you said, a lot of controversial, quote-unquote, casting, depending on how you look at Michael Keaton's career. I mean, up to that point when he was all comedy, and then, boom, all of a sudden, he's Batman.
Right, and it's funny because the same thing has happened with each successive Batman as they have been cast, as there has been a lot of controversy over when Christian Bale was cast and then when Ben Affleck was cast. And for the most part, I think the casting of the Batmans have generally gone very well. If the Batman movies have been bad, it is because of the script issues and the story, or the director generally does not have a lot to do with the casting. The casting of Michael Keaton at the time was very controversial. There was a lot of complaining, and there was no Twitter or social media to complain about. So this is something that reached the mainstream even. And part of the concern with casting Michael Keaton was the fact that in the history of Batman, the most famous on-screen presentation of Batman was 20 years earlier when Adam West was cast as Batman and Burt Ward was cast as Robin, and you had the more comedic stylings of the 1966 Batman, which spawned a movie of its own and was a monumental hit in 1966 and 67, and eventually it very quickly faded away. But for a couple of years there, Batman was very, very important within even the television industry, and once the Batman TV show ended, Batman became much more serious. As I've been seeing in the documentaries, is that Batman did become more serious. And then in the 1980s, you had some of the more famous comics ever written by Frank Miller, as he wrote both Year One and The Dark Knight Returns, which are two very, very important aspects to the Batman legacy. And you see elements of both throughout this 1989 Batman film. So there's a lot of baggage that comes with Batman, and that's, I think, the big difference between Batman and Superman is there really wasn't a lot of backlash, or there really wasn't a lot of baggage with the Superman movie compared to the TV show. The problem was, for this 1989 Batman, how do you balance the comedy versus just making this into more of a moody, artistic, serious piece of filmmaking? Part of the way that they established credibility, when we talked about Superman last week, we talked about casting Marlon Brando, casting Gene Hackman. This time with the Batman movies, you obviously have Michael Keaton, who is more of a comedic actor at this point, but the two people that were kind of cast in this movie to give it that credibility, Academy Award-winning actor Jack Nicholson, as well as Academy Award-winning Jack Palance, who played kind of the heavies in this film. Jack Palance has a very small role in the first hour or so. And, of course, Jack Nicholson played the Joker, and for about 20 years he had the definitive Joker performance. Not only that, he made a lot of money on this movie. He signed basically a sweetheart deal, Brian. There were rumors that he has made up to $60 million off of this film just because of what he was able to do and what he was able to sign, meaning Jack Nicholson is a very, very smart man.
Yeah, why did he's at the front row of all the Laker games? Because it's like the number one expensive ticket in all of basketball at the time when he was going front row. I don't know if he's still doing it now. I don't watch the Lakers anymore because I'm not on the bandwagon. He has made so much money, and I don't know the exact details of the deal, but it does involve all future Batman movies, correct?
I believe so. If somebody would like to correct, if someone would like to correct me, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. But yeah, I believe that Jack Nicholson still continues to make money off of these films, and again, that's great for him. I mean, I will never complain about somebody being that intelligent and understanding that this is something that has a lot of legs to it and being able to make a profit from it.
Even getting 1% at the time of all future Batman grosses, or something crazy like that, even at 1%, that's a ton of money.
Especially when you're not doing any work.
Yeah, good for him. Good for him. But yeah, his performance, definitely the lasting legacy for 20 years. Looking back now, definitely Dark Knight has a better dialogue for the Joker to give, I think. Yeah, this was more campy-ish, kind of. I can kind of compare it, going back to wrestling here. I hate to say this, but you look how poorly scripted, like, a WWE promo can be for a wrestler. But sometimes certain people, like a Kurt Angle, can just knock it out of the park because they're fucking Kurt Angle. You know what I mean? And that's what you got with Jack Nicholson. He took, like, basic comic book kind of dialogue, kind of, I felt. It wasn't strong. It was just him, like, I like to hurt people, and I'm crazy now because I entered this bad of stuff. Ha ha ha. I have really no motivation except just because, the Joker didn't have much of a motivation in Dark Knight either, but his, I think, motivation in Dark Knight was really to just, like, get at Batman. And in this one, there's no, like, I have to get at Batman. Like, Batman just kind of, like, Joker just wants revenge, basically, on Jack Palance. He gets that and takes over the gang, but then it's kind of like, what do I do from here? And then, at least in Dark Knight, that, like, Joker was just motivated because it was a reaction to seeing the Batman. You know what I mean? This one, it's just like, Joker's a happen of circumstance. He gets betrayed. They didn't really do... They tried with the character. I just feel like they overthought it maybe a little bit. I do feel like I don't like the fact, spoiler alert. Sorry, everybody. It's been fucking 30 years. He kills Batman's parents. I never liked that. Never like that.
There are two major complaints about this movie. That is the first one, that the Joker is in fact the person that killed Batman's parents. The other one is Vicky Vale being brought into the Batcave. That is the other major complaint, and I think both of those are extremely valid. I don't know, the Vicky Vale one doesn't annoy... The Joker one actually annoys me more, and I really can't explain why. But it's just one of those things that you do in a movie, but it is totally inappropriate for the comic. Within the context of both of those situations, to just kind of have that. Because the whole purpose of Batman wasn't that it was the Joker that killed his parents and now he's seeking revenge on the Joker. It's that he is defending Gotham from crime in general, and when you have the Joker kill his parents, you're kind of changing his pathos.
Yeah, his motivation. Like, we never get Batman's true motivation in this movie, I feel. Like, we just get, him being Bruce Wayne and then him fighting crime, but we never get to the root of why he's fighting crime. Until, they reveal that his parents are, killed, blah, blah, blah. And that's, I guess everyone kind of knows the backstory, but I felt like Batman Begins took that extra effort for the first 30 minutes to get to the real heart of why he wants to be Batman, right? And this one is just from what I read somewhere, someone, you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, I read this somewhere, in an interview that Tim Burton said that this takes place 8 weeks after he first becomes Batman. So it's essentially in the realm of that Batman Year One kind of... I just feel like we never got to the true heart and reason why he wants to be Batman. It's just here's Batman. And then we never kind of figure out why he wants to do this. But Batman Beyond Batman Begins, taking that extra step really helped you connect to the Christian Bale Batman more than I feel like a lot of people did with the Michael Keaton Batman. That's the feeling I get. I connect more with the Christian Bale one just because you saw what he went through and the reason why he wants to fight crime and even being stealing and being a thief himself kind of thing. We never get that. It's just here's Bruce Wayne and he's Batman. We got more of an origin story with Joker than we did with Batman. And then give us the story of the origin story for the first 15 minutes.
I think that Batman Begins probably is one of the greatest origin stories ever told, and I don't think you're going to really ever top that. And I think that within the superhero genre, telling the origin story has kind of become very passé at this point, but I think there's still things that you can do if you don't want to have an origin story where you can give some background on the character. There's still things that you can do to indicate to people why they're fighting crime or why they're becoming a superhero and whatnot.
And they did that. They tried that way too late with Batman Forever.
Right, and that, when we talk about that, I think it's going to just be an hour of us talking about how it completely failed in every conceivable way. But I think part of the issue with this movie from a story perspective is that the story fundamentally doesn't make sense. The Joker's plan... So the Joker's an artist. That's something that he says at least 3 times. And basically he is trying to poison people by having them use different products on themselves, different combinations.
That he poisoned with the toxin that made him into Joker, basically. Right? That's what I got from it. He's trying to poison them with the same stuff that he got poisoned with.
And then in the end, he just wants to gas them all. In a parade. While Prince is playing.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of... it felt like they didn't really, know where to end. It felt like they established these characters for, an hour and a half, and then they had to come up with, a plot for the Joker to try to go through with. Story kind of lacked there.
I have a feeling that my score for this is just going to be significantly higher than yours, because I actually... don't think that it holds up from a story perspective, but in almost every other score, I'm probably going to be very, very generous with my scoring. So let's talk about the heroes of this. Obviously, we have Batman, we have Alfred, Vicky Vale, Alexander Knox, Commissioner Gordon, Harvey Dent, kind of the major heroes. As far as Michael Keaton goes, I think he does a very good job. They don't really ever give him a lot to do in the first 2 Batman movies, but I think with what he is able to do, I think he does a good job differentiating his voice. I think he creates a good balance between being Bruce Wayne and being Batman. I think the suit is actually... one of the big problems with the suit, of course, is that his neck, he's not really able to move his neck. But I actually like the visual design of the suit, the Batmobile, and the Batcave a lot. In fact, one of my big frustrations with both the Nolan and the DCEU version of Batman is the Batcave has just sucked. It just hasn't looked very good. and it hasn't looked functional at times. But I really like the Batcave as it is presented by Tim Burton in this particular version of Batman. So little to work with, it's tough to say, oh, Batman was great, but I think it was at least good. And I think the opening scene where we kind of see him go after these two random criminals, I think it does a good job of just kind of establishing what Batman is trying to do. I think there's some good scenes throughout. I don't think the story necessarily adds up, but I do think that there are some very, very good moments as far as Batman in some of the fight scenes. When Batman comes crashing into the art museum to save Vicky Vale, I think that's a really good scene. And yeah, there's a lot of really good moments in this, but I don't think it necessarily adds up.
My favorite scene is definitely the Vicky Vale Joker art scene. Like, that was, to me, every time I think of Batman, like, that's the scene I think of the most. Just the way they were interacting. Jack Nicholson taking what, the script that he got with and just kind of, like, turning it into something good. He got normal kind of scene of them just, like, talking, not as comic-y, kind of thing. And I really like the way that, and then all of a sudden it goes comic-y when they just start, like, spray painting everything and destroying all the paintings and stuff. I don't know why that scene really sticks out to me the most, but maybe because it's Prince or whatever, but I think it's just Jack Nicholson. It's because of Prince. But yeah, that scene, like I said, it's not really strong, but it's memorable, and definitely the visual is, like, the most memorable thing for me. So in terms of the heroes, man, like, I'd say that, yeah, I think Batman, he was really good. He was really good. I just felt like him as Bruce Wayne, they could have done more. Like, I just felt like he was just so boring as Bruce Wayne. And, like, that's not how I kind of picture Bruce Wayne. I picture Bruce Wayne being, like, I guess, like, the Christian Bale Bruce Wayne, where he's just, like, this playboy kind of thing going on. But, I don't know, he seemed kind of like, for a Michael Keaton that's done so much comedy in the way he acted in Beetlejuice, he seemed more, like, restricted in this role, which I get because he's supposed to be the stoic hero Batman, but he could have done so much more as, like, him being Bruce Wayne, I thought. Like, that was kind of what I felt like took it back for me.
Right. And then I think one of the more unfortunate aspects of this entire series is the way that Alfred and Commissioner Gordon are both just completely sidelined and relegated to mostly being side characters. And I think that is extremely unfortunate, particularly in the case of Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Gordon he's pretty useless, especially in the later films, but even in this first one, he's more treated as kind of this bumbling clown that really doesn't serve much of a purpose except to be kind of a foil. He doesn't really have a relationship with Batman. For me, Gary Oldman is probably my favorite interpretation of Alfred in anything that I've ever read or seen. So I'm going to be very biased in that direction. I think Gary Oldman is absolutely fantastic as Commissioner Gordon. And even keeping that in mind, the Commissioner Gordon of these first four Batman films are not good. As far as Alfred goes, I think Michael Gough does a very good job of playing Alfred kind of in this role, but ultimately Alfred really doesn't serve much of a purpose. And in fact, I think if we were to take the comic book interpretation, if Alfred were to bring Vicky Vale into the Batcave, Alfred would be fired.
Oh, God, yeah. Nah, man, like, why? Dude, he's only been Batman for, like, 2 months, and you're already, like, revealing your identity to, like, a chick that you just met, like, a week ago.
Yes, that is something to keep in mind.
I get it. You want to, have a scene where you reveal yourself to the woman you love, I guess, that you met a week ago. So going back to Alfred, though, like, I feel like now, looking back, it's a wasted opportunity because I never knew Alfred was such a great character until Michael Caine became Alfred, damn, Michael Caine was so good as Alfred, right? But you look back here and it's like there's this missed opportunity of the whole, like, father-son relationship that no one really talks about between Alfred and Batman, right? Or Bruce Wayne. He's the pseudo-father figure, and they never really get into that at all.
There's two scenes that basically address it almost.
And you look back now, it's like they could have done so much more with that Alfred character and like have him do more. Like if you would have had him be a little bit younger but still older, be that father figure and then help Batman whenever he needed, kind of thing, the way they did it in Dark Knight and Batman Begins and all that. I felt like looking back now, it's like you realize how much of a missed opportunity there is there for those special scenes between the two. And there was definitely moments in this movie you could have had that, but instead it was just like, Alfred, give me a sandwich.
Yes. I think even the DCEU Batmans use Alfred much better. I mean, Jeremy Irons is actually kind of in the thick of things and really helping Batman out, and I actually appreciate that a lot.
I would go as far as like in those like, okay, spoiler alert, everybody, Justice League. There's a meeting between all the heroes in a room, okay? But I thought it would have been cool if Alfred was in there giving his guidance too, being the older one. But then hypothetically, Wonder Woman's older than all of them, so. But I just felt like Alfred, is a missed opportunity for a lot of these movies now. Looking back, and it's just like he is this father figure that he's, the guy looking out for him, and you never really pick up on that, Definitely in this one, like there were so many scenes where Bruce Wayne needed that guidance, and he kind of gets it from Alfred, but it's just like through like subtle, like offhanded comments that he makes, kind of thing.
We had to give a lot of screen time to Alexander Knox, played by Robert Wool, and in 2017, Alexander Knox does not happen. I cannot imagine that a character like this gets written into a Batman movie, just because he is treated as the comedy relief, and his relationship with Vicky Vale is really creepy, actually, and there really isn't much to him. I mean, they give him a lot of screen time, but it's not like we ever get, why does Alexander Knox care so much about who Batman is? And there is a story to be told about that, and that is a fascinating perspective that I'm not sure the comic books have ever really explored to that great a detail. So there is a story to be told. They just don't, they throw it out there, but they don't really, there's no follow-up with Alexander Knox and his fascination or want to understand who Batman is.
Like, I bet if I can go back, I could edit him out of the movie and it wouldn't matter. Like, almost. I could almost do that, I think.
You could almost do that with Vicky Vale, too. She screams a lot.
At least with Vicky Vale, like, she's there in the center of things. He's just there commenting on things. When Vicky Vale finds out that Bruce Wayne's parents are killed, like, he's the one finding the article, right? She could have just done that by herself and just cut that guy out completely. He was, like, totally unnecessary. I just felt like they needed, like, a guy to throw comedy lines in, and they just said, okay, we're going to write this character in for comic relief, and we have to satisfy the certain audience, that kind of thing. So
Vicky Vale is not a good journalist.
Not at all. And
do we really? Let's cite the numerous examples. Sleeping with the subject on the first date, not good journalism.
Yeah, definitely.
The fact that she cannot find that she is not the one that is who finds out about Bruce Wayne's parents dying, which totally should have been what happened.
Yeah, you would think that she would look that up on the first news item that would pop up on Bruce Wayne.
Not hiding the camera from Batman when she took all those pictures.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with this Vicky Vale character that.
And my criticism is of the writing, not of Kim Basinger's performance. I think she is perfectly fine doing what she is asked to do, and I think again in 2017 this character just gets written a lot better. This is even more so than the visuals of some of these films, where the way female characters are written does not hold up.
Yeah, it's I don't know. She's not a strong female character. There's not a lot of. Is she the only female character in this movie?
Really, I'm trying to think of any of the other female characters. There's Jack Napier's girlfriend, played by Carrie.
Yeah.
That's about it, though.
Yeah, it's very much a lot of dudes going around doing crazy things in this movie, using Vicky Vale as as an object, less of a person type deal. Especially with Jack Nicholson calling her a piece of art or whatever it was. So
yeah, there's also that. I mean, Jack Nicholson, the Joker, calls multiple women in this movie.
Yeah, so there's very much that. I don't want to say misogynistic tone, but it's just like this tone with the perspective of a male who doesn't really write strong female characters, kind of thing, and it definitely shows. Again, that kind of takes it down a little bit in the score for the story. I guess we can talk about what the villain now in Jack Nicholson's legacy.
There's the Joker, there's Carl Grissom, and then there's Lieutenant Eckhart. My favorite part of the Lieutenant Eckhart story is that it is the same actor who played Porkins in the original Star Wars. I love that connection for so many different reasons.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I was like, what? I didn't even think about that. And then, no, you're right. And
well, I looked at it was on IMDb. I didn't actually know this, but it just amused me to know it.
Wait, okay, so on the show, I don't know if we watched Gotham, but he's on Gotham, right? That Eckhart character? Or no? I think he is. Because, like, I really didn't think of him as just a character, and then I found out that he kind of came back. I think he was in the Dark Knight trilogy.
I always thought it was Bullock.
Oh, wait. Yeah, that was Bullock.
It's Donald Logue plays Harvey Bullock.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. My bad. I'm mixing those up. But, yeah, a lot of interesting connections. I don't know. What do you think about Jack Palance? Was he wasted or what?
I think, again, given his specific role, I think he did a good job with it. Kind of the original heavy, kind of adding some credibility. I think it was always designed to be a small role, and you really can't have both Jack Nicholson and Jack Palance in the movie for a lot of the time. Makes sense to kill off Jack Palance early on. I don't think he was wasted at all. I think he has always been more of a character actor or a supporting actor, and has never really been considered, a lead performer. Even though he did win an Academy Award for City Slickers, but he's never been a guy who's like, oh, this is a Jack Palance movie. That's what I was gonna kind of mention, because like I saw City Slickers before I saw Batman '89 when I was a kid, right? Actually, I saw City Slickers 2, and then I watched City Slickers 1 on VHS like a week later. Yeah, and what is up with that?
What? Watching me
sequels before.
It's because I was born in '88, so like when they take me to the theater, they're gonna show like my parents brought me to like City Slickers 2, which was in theaters, and then I would go home and rent the first one, not knowing like what. So this is the sequel. What's the first one? It's just the time thing. But like I remember like just seeing Jack Palance and just remembering like him carrying those movies, and then when I go back and see this, I'm like, wow, like he's in this movie, and then he's just gone after like nothing. But I just wanted more out of him for some reason. I guess I had a love for those City Slickers movies, and then going back watching what's that movie where he's the villain? Shane. I like Shane a lot. That Western.
Palance is very good, and then of course there is Jack Nicholson, who, I mean, he is one of the greatest American actors of all time, and if you look at his filmography going from the '60s up until the early 2000s, this is somebody who has been such an important factor in the history of filmmaking, and I think he's almost more famous for being Jack Nicholson than for any of his roles, and I think that is reflected in some of his performances, because Jack Nicholson is really not playing anyone, he's just playing Jack Nicholson. But, even with all that in mind, there is a lot of cachet, and it is totally understandable why Batman would have Jack Nicholson play this role, because I mean, he's one of the most famous actors of all time. He is also somebody who is very good at marketing. He's also someone that is a name that is going to bring, older audiences into the theater. And I think he does that even more so than one of the other rumored selections, Robin Williams, which would have been very different. Robin Williams as the Joker would have just been very different.
Yeah, I've heard that one too, and I always think I think he would have brought like even more of a darkness to the role. I feel because Robin Williams had that ability to really get to those dark places, and we know why now. Obviously, after his suicide, like that would have been even more darker. I think
he would have been much more manic.
Oh God, I can just imagine it now. It would have been really, really just out of place. Jack Nicholson would have been is the better choice overall, I think, because he kind of brings some like levity to it sometimes. He'll like dance around and say some things, and then take it down to a notch to a dark place, and then take it back up to a lighter place, and then take it down to a dark place.
Really strikes the balance very well. I mean, I think the villain's part of this. Even though there really is only one villain, he gets a lot of screen time. The Joker is the center of the movie, I think, for a reason, because I think Jack Nicholson is clearly providing the best performance of this entire movie, and I can understand why you would edit and kind of make him the centerpiece, because what he is doing is definitely, there's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs, there's some comedy thrown in there, there's a lot of seriousness. It's without question the best performance in the whole movie. I think when you look at the Batman Rogues Gallery in general, it is the strongest batch of villains that you can find. There is so much to each of the characters, and many of them have not been done justice over the course of the films. But one of the weaknesses of a lot of the MCU movies is that you really don't have strong villains. But with Batman, you've got the Joker, you've got Two-Face, you've got the Penguin, you've got all these great villains, and arguably the Joker is the greatest villain of all time because he is so evenly matched with Batman, and the Joker encompasses so many aspects of what Batman could be. And the Joker can be so many different things. He can be funny, but he can also be serious and very dark.
Yeah, and you definitely got that here. I would say as a performance overall, I don't know. Comparing it to the Heath Ledger, there's always going to be this debate. We can touch on it here, but for me it kind of changes every couple of years. Like, obviously when Dark Knight came out, I thought, man, Heath Ledger was 10 times better than Jack Nicholson ever was. But then you go back and look at now, and it's like Jack Nicholson had so much less to work with, and yet he knocked it out of the park. So there's that to consider too.
And there was so much less of an understanding of what a comic book movie still could be. I mean, in 1989, I think people were still thinking of comic book movies as being primarily for kids and not something really to be taken seriously. I think by 2008, thanks to Batman Begins, and I think thanks to what Christopher Nolan was doing with the overall presentation of Batman, I think that perception changed a great deal.
Thanks to Jack Nicholson, it kind of the villain kind of got this respectability kind of thing. You get a little bit of that with Terrence Stamp, I think, and a little bit of that with Lex Luthor and Superman, with Gene Hackman. When Jack Nicholson in this performance, he kind of takes it to that legitimacy.
All right, so we have discussed the story, the villains, the heroes. Let's talk about the visuals, and I think this, to me, is one of the strongest parts of the film. I think Gotham is very distinct. One of my complaints about the Christopher Nolan version of Gotham is that it felt like three different cities. The first one kind of felt Gotham-y, but the second one, it's basically Chicago. And in the third one, it's basically Pittsburgh. So Gotham really has never felt individualized like it was in the first movie. The first movie feels very much like Gotham is its own character. That you've got the Joker's makeup, which I think was very well rendered, both when he is as a clown and when he is, wearing makeup on top of makeup. There's also the Batsuit, which I mentioned my affection for, as well as the fantastic design of the Batmobile. And even more so than the Nolan movies, I love the Batsuit, the Batmobile, and the Batcave, and even Gotham more so than when Christopher Nolan was doing. Part of it is this is a little bit more of a cartoonish interpretation and less realistic. The visuals are very strong, and they really hold up. Even 30 years later, there are a couple of effects that look a little janky, but for the most part, the visuals of this movie hold up extremely well.
Oh, I agree. I love the way... So yeah, I really love the look of this movie. I totally agree. Basically, it just comes to life. That's the strength of, hiring a guy like Tim Burton. He can definitely get the look of a movie. And he gets the look of Batman. And he gets the look of Gotham City. It's definitely got, like you said, the gothic look. And what's interesting about this movie and the Batman movies in this series is that you never know, what year these take place in, right? I always assumed that, when I first watched them as a kid, they take place in the 40s, but then they have this modern approach to them, and they're okay, maybe they take place now. It's so weird. The way that they make the buildings look way taller than I think they are. The way they shoot the buildings and the way that there's this emphasis on heights and because Batman staring from above kind of thing. They give you that feel of the size of the building, the height of the building. Everything had this old school kind of feel to it, and what's cool is obviously the Batman animated series really got influence from the movie and took that look and made it into the animated series, which you can still see. It's clear that this is it's almost as if this was in the same universe as the animated series, because you can just kind of feel it. I mean, they really brought it to life. It's stunning. It's beautiful. It like you said, it definitely still holds up. I think this was what they did, that CGI bat at the beginning, or like at the beginning shot was like some partial CGI, I think, and it still looked good to me. Like the Batmobile that they introduced in this movie, which is the Batmobile that they have in the whole series of these movies, that's like the iconic Batmobile to me. I know a lot of people have that fondness for like the Batmobile from the '60s show, but this one, like, to me, like, this was like the Batmobile growing up in the '90s. Every time I saw a toy at the toy store, a friend of mine was playing Batman or whatever, the Batmobile was like that specific Batmobile. And to me, that, like, that's iconic. And they really got the look down and redesigning it and making it bold and standing out, and like the way that the wings pop up in the back, and the way it's got those curves, like it had that modern, sleek kind of look to it, also looking like something that Batman would have. And I really love that Batmobile look. And this was like I guess the marketing was based around the whole black and yellow thing, right? Because that logo is like, probably, because if you look at the history of the Batman logo, it changes throughout time, right? But the black and yellow with the curved wings kind of thing, like, I have that on my shower curtain. You know, that's the iconic Batman logo to me, even more. Because, like, you look at the Nolan logos, it's just, like, sharp kind of, like, edges and stuff. And this one's more, like, rounded and, like, bold kind of, it feels to me. You know what I mean? And I definitely feel like this is, like, one of the more iconic, memorable Batman logos. And you look around, like, a lot of the merchandising for, like, you know, Batman in general, and you get this kind of logo that's been kind of like the logo in the comics for some of the latter comics. So, definitely the look has this lasting legacy. It still holds up today, and it probably out of all those first four Batman movies, I think this has the best look, even more than Batman Returns, which I think has that even more darker look to it. But this one really gives emphasis on like the buildings and stuff and all that kind of thing. And like when you see the flashback of him and his parents, like that theater looks like such an old school theater in like the background with like the look of it and stuff. So I definitely dug the look and feel. The only thing, though, is like you never know where this takes place in time. It's kind of like this timeless kind of feel to it.
And I think that is one of the things that makes this such a strong movie. And when we would talk about legacy, I think one of the things that it clearly did is to make Batman a little bit more serious again. Christopher Nolan did the same exact thing with The Dark Knight, making it even more serious and kind of bringing it back after the Batman franchise once again fell into becoming more comedic and less serious. But for me, I think that is part of its legacy. The marketing aspect to it, the Summer of Batman, having that symbol everywhere. The 90-second trailer that got everybody going crazy for this movie. Apparently people were paying to get into movies just watching the trailer and leaving. That is something that still happens with films to this day, especially when you get your big movies like Star Wars. And I think you've also got this continuing aspect of what it means to create a superhero movie by hiring credible actors as the villains and maybe lesser known people by the heroes. I am not sure that the story of this film holds up, but certainly I would argue this is one of the more rewatchable Batman movies, and it is an important film within the history of the superhero genre. And you've also got that Danny Elfman score, and you've also got all of the various Prince songs that are a part of this that are very memorable, very catchy. And I think the soundtrack, as much as anything, is a huge part of the Batman legacy.
Yeah, Danny Elfman, like, created the Batman theme. Like, Hans Zimmer made, like, you know, like a Batman theme that was very dramatic and heavy and whatever, but this was, like, the iconic dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Like, every time I go to Six Flags and go to, like, the Gotham City section, you hear that music, and it just takes you back. As serious as, like, Hans Zimmer is, Danny Elfman can just, like, lighten things up a bit, and you kind of need that. The musical score definitely lightened things up. I don't know about lightening things up, but, like, it definitely, like, set the tone, and, like, I don't know, Danny Elfman really has, I think he gets the Batman character in terms of, like, scoring it, like, the music of what it sounds like. I think he gets that more. Hans Zimmer kind of, like, yeah, they're epic, but it's just so dark sometimes, you know? And then Danny Elfman carrying on that theme into the animated show, it makes him even more of a lasting legacy, I think.
Yes, and I think people still think of that iconic theme, which a little bit was heard in the Justice League of it.
Little bit. I remember that and just marking out for that moment. But
needed more. Needed the To me, if you create a theme that is that iconic, why would you even bother trying to create something else? This doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah. I don't know if it would fit the tone for Dark Knight, though, but it definitely had its tone in Justice League for that brief moment of time they played it. So,
right. All right, let's get to the burning questions. Brian, why are we even talking about this film? Batman isn't a superhero.
Well, if you ask Ben Affleck, his superpower is being rich. But to me, like, he does have a superpower, man. The dude doesn't sleep. He's just obsessive. I don't know if he's like, I guess technically he's a not psychopath. He's maybe a sociopath. I don't know if that's like a superpower or not, but he's definitely transcendent. Like, maybe he's just so obsessed to the point that it goes beyond the human capabilities. Because, yeah, he doesn't have superpowers, but he's just super, like, obsessive. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely.
More so than a normal human.
Does Michael Keaton's performance as Batman hold up?
That's tough, man. I was thinking about this one. It holds up, but it makes you wanting more. I feel like it's lacking in some parts, and they try to make up for it in the future films, but just can't get quite to it. And so Bale takes over as Batman, and you get that motive, that true motive of why he wants to fight crime and whatnot, and see his journey before he becomes Batman, kind of thing. Here, Michael Keaton, and he could have, like I said, he could have been so much more in this movie, but it is what it is.
I think part of the problem is that we have seen just how well the MCU in particular has done superheroes, and even some of the X-Men movies, the way that they've done Wolverine makes it really hard to look at Michael Keaton's performance and say, well, wow, that was a really great Batman. I would say no, that this unfortunately does not hold up. I would say that Jack Nicholson's performance as the Joker holds up, even despite the fact that we have this Heath Ledger performance that is out there and, has won an Academy Award. But still, I think Jack Nicholson provided a very early blueprint for, what a villain could be in a superhero film. And unfortunately, I think a lot of actors that followed him in this franchise took it a little bit too far and tried to out Jack Nicholson, and it didn't work. And once we get into Batman Returns, Forever, and Batman and Robin, I think we will see the unfortunate results of that. But yes, I do think Jack Nicholson's individual performance as the Joker holds up.
Oh, for sure. I guess a lot of people would always compare every performance of the Joker to it. But, everyone's got to kind of create their own. He created his own based, around a guy who, I guess he kind of pretty much based on himself, like a crazier version of himself. It still holds up. He had, such crappy dialogue in some of these scenes, I felt. And he just took it and went with it, man.
For sure. Is this the most rewatchable of any Batman movies?
No. Well, I mean, yeah, it's rewatchable, but the most rewatchable? No. I'd say maybe the most rewatchable is probably Dark Knight for me, just because I'm always finding something new, and the littlest things. But this one is just younger people, especially, will have a different perspective on this movie. I think when they watch it, I get this feeling like it's kind of come off kind of cheesy. I mean, some of it is cheesy, but even more cheesy for that generation, I feel it'll be. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the rewatchability of this movie.
I think Begins and The Dark Knight Rises are tough rewatches. I definitely think The Dark Knight among the Nolan movies is the most rewatchable. I'm not sure. I think I need to rewatch The Dark Knight again and really kind of keep this in mind. But right now I'm going to say yes, that I think this is the most rewatchable of any of the Batman movies. That does not mean it is the best, though. Not even close.
For sure.
Why is Batman such an easy character to adapt? We talked a lot about Superman being very difficult to adapt, but we have a million Batman movies. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad. We have a lot of animated movies to talk about. Why is Batman so easy to adapt?
Well, he's human, right? So we connect with his human emotions, and anyone connects to that story about whenever someone hears about Batman's parents for the first time, they're just like, wow, that's how does a kid handle that kind of thing? You know what I mean? And from there, you kind of explore the character. So it's very much that human story. I know some people can obviously relate to that, and then it's just the idea of losing your parents, getting murdered in front of you kind of thing. And it's very much that human story. Superman, you're an alien, you have these superpowers, hard to relate to. Batman, you're a human, you got thrown a bad hand, and, now you got to deal with it. And you can deal with it one way, or you can deal with it another way. And Bruce Wayne decided to deal with it in a completely different way than what normal people would do. I wouldn't say it's as easy. It's just a lot of it is already like laid out for you. There's not really much hard work to do in terms of like adapting the character as a whole. You could easily fuck it up, like easily, if you just didn't like care and just like made it like campy and not really care about the parents and like de-emphasize the parents or whatever. But once you bring up like his origin story, you kind of feel like he's more relatable because it's a human emotion. It's a natural human emotion to like that feeling of losing your parents. We all go through that, and that resonates.
Certainly. Let's go through our scores. This is the big moment, Brian. Heroes, out of 10, I gave Batman a 6.
Ooh, I will go with an 8.
Really? You have a lot more respect. Because I'm not just encompassing Batman, I'm also encompassing Alfred, I'm also encompassing Commissioner Gordon, Vicky Vale, Alexander Knox as well. And I just don't think it's very good in that regard.
I'm giving it an 8 because at least they got to the like Batman being the defender, and you know it's classic Batman with what we see, you know, and that's kind of what the fans wanted coming out of the theater. Like some of the reactions I saw at like those old school videos, people like really dug like the Batman aspect of like him kicking ass kind of thing, and that's what we all kind of want to see, you know. So that's the satisfying part of it to me, is like seeing Batman on screen kicking ass, especially back then for the first time. You know, it kind of like it does its effect.
Villains, I gave this an 8.
I'll go with an 8 too. It's kind of like just some of the dialogue that Nicholson had to just deal with, but yep. Nicholson just knocks it out of the park, and yeah, he does an awesome job basically, and he kind of carries the movie in a lot of it to me, a lot of the movie actually. So that's all on him.
Now I'm very interested to hear your score. Story, out of 10, I gave this a 6.
I got to go with like a 6. I'll go with a 6 too, because like you said, some of the plot holes, and then like just some of the way that they introduced Batman and they kind of just threw Batman at us. We never get that origin story until like Batman Begins. You know what I mean? Like we kind of like get glimpses of it, but we never get the true heart of the character, which I mentioned before, which I think kind of lacked, and you needed to have that to get that emotional connection. So I have to give it a 6.
Yeah, the story is clearly the weakest part for me. Visuals, I gave this an 8.
I'm going to go with a 9, because, like, man, just the way they bring that city to life, and it's just, like, so artistic, and it's so Tim Burton, if that's the way to put it, you know what I mean? Because Tim Burton, like, gets every movie he does, despite how bad the script is, brings that world to life. Like, for a movie like for example, Sleepy Hollow, that could have been just any other Victorian-looking kind of, you know, set piece kind of look, right? But he made it its own and made it this memorable kind of visual darkness mixed with the bright blood kind of red colors kind of thing for Sleepy Hollow. And this one, he does kind of the same thing. He just brings the world to life, and it could have looked boring. He made it its own. It made it like the city of Gotham City is like kind of its own character in this movie with the visual style and look. So I got to give it a 9.
And of course, there is the legacy of this film, which I'm going to give an 8, and I'm dinging it because I think some of the follow-up villain performances were not good at all, and I think that's what loses it a point. And I think what really gives it an 8 is a lot of the strong marketing involved, and the fact that so many of these superhero genre films have kind of followed this formula, and what it was able to do to prove once again that the superhero genre was something that could be very, very successful, and you could really bring these heroes to life, so to speak. So for those reasons, I give this an 8.
Legacy, I gotta go with 9, strictly because of what you said, the visuals and the marketing and stuff. And then I gotta throw in a little extra for like Danny Elfman and that score for like, just like whenever you think of, for me, like when you think of Batman, like that theme kind of like resonates within the subconscious of those thoughts. You know, it's like, that's the theme. It's because of this movie. And then because of that theme that, you know, it led to the animated series, and I'm a big fan of the animated series. So that influences, you know, my look at the legacy of it. So I give it a 9, an extra point, just because of that score. Like the marketing, man, like, God, there were so many toys back in the day. I had some of the toys from the later movies. The idea of like all these different stuff, like these toys and stuff, like they definitely got the marketing stuff from like from Star Wars, when they released Star Wars in '78, and all the marketing behind that. So But this legacy of like all the toys and stuff, I remember as a kid, not necessarily for this one, but for like Forever and Returns, like those toys as a kid, like getting that, like that's to me, like that's something that's kind of like a legacy that like it lasts in your brain kind of thing. It's part of your childhood. Like we said of the legacy, it could be good, it could be bad, but it does resonate. So I got to give it a 9.
And the totals for me, so for Heroes, I gave a 6, Villains 8, Story 6, Visuals 8, Legacy 8. My total is 36.
Okay, so mine was Heroes, what is it, 8? And I gave the Villains an 8. And let's see, the Story I gave a 6. And the Visuals I gave a 9. And the Legacy I gave a 9, so that's 40?
All right, so the total score that we have given this is a 76, so this falls just short of our Hall of Fame, and I personally think that that's appropriate. I certainly understand that this has a very important legacy, but I do not think that this is something that should be considered an all-time great superhero movie.
Yeah, see, this is where we're gonna get, I don't know, some controversy or whatnot, but I was thinking this might not make the cut either, and just because of that story score really hurts it, and yeah, it does have a lasting legacy, but yeah, it's sometimes it's just got to hold up in certain in other areas too, not just the visuals and not just its legacy and the way we remember it, kind of thing. So that's the nature of the score.
All right, so we have now put Superman. Superman is in. We have called it and put it in the Hall of Fame with a score of an 84. Batman has come up just short with a 76. Brian, any final thoughts before we exit for this week?
Eventually, we knew this would come where we would get a borderline score, and we're gonna see the reaction. So I'm kind of interested in seeing the reaction. We'll see, because I don't think it's like Hall of the Pantheon level either. Honestly, like.
You gave it a score that was that, though.
Well, 40. It's borderline, kind of, right? Hypothetical. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's definitely not in the Pantheon. It's definitely got a legacy of, like, marketing and stuff and the visuals, but I want to see the other people's reaction to this and see what the general consensus is.
Absolutely. So, Brian, as we end things, I have just one question for you.
Shoot.
Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight?
Yeah, I did once, and then the next morning I couldn't remember shit, and then the next thing I know, something about Rosemary's Baby.